The Select Board meeting for Monday, November 23rd, 2020. This evening, we will have one of our members joining us virtually. Ms. Tina Hine is not with us, but is going to be joining us via the Zoom. And consequently, I must read a notice relative to that action being virtual. So pursuant to the Governor's order suspending certain provisions of the Open Meeting Law, General Law, Chapter 30A, Paragraph 20, as well as the Select Board's emergency order dated March 16, 2020. The Select Board and Governance Committee will be using remote participation for this meeting. The audio of this meeting is being recorded and will be posted to the town's website within 24 hours in accordance with the Governor's emergency action requirement of keeping the public informed of actions during this meeting. I would ask that all participants remotely attending this meeting please state your name for identification purposes each time you speak throughout the meeting. At this time, a roll call attendance for each committee will be taken. We'll start with the Select Board. All those in favor say aye by name. Mr. Sparrow?
Ben Sparrow, I'm here. Aye.
Ms. Hine?
Tina Hine, aye.
John Cronin, aye. Sam, we would ask if you and your committee could join us through a similar vote.
Sure. We'll start with Len Engel.
Present.
And Paul LeBeau.
Paul, you're muted.
Present.
Okay. Tina Lingham.
Present.
Scott McKechnie.
Present.
Sam Tyler, present. So we're all here.
Great, thanks, Sam. We'll start our agenda with the Governance Committee update to the Select Board. So at this time, I'll turn it over to you, Sam. All yours.
Okay, well, thank you. This is, I think, third or fourth time that we've been before the Select Board, and we're happy to report in. We've made, I think, good progress. We still are dealing with drafts, and we'll finalize those soon enough so that we will have plenty of time to meet with you again and other boards and officials to review what we have put together regarding the budget development process, then be submitted to you for annual town meeting in May of 2021. So early on in our sessions, we decided that the budget development process would be what we would tackle first, since we did notice that there are a number of other towns that have articles that lay the process, and Holliston bylaws are silent on that matter. And at this particular time, with a new town administrator, and we thought that it would be appropriate to really put that down in writing, so there is some structure. And we've also identified 15 towns that we staying in touch with. We've not only relied on them in part for their bylaws and charters, but also we've reached out to their town administrators or town managers to talk to them about the process as it works in their town. And from that's all been helpful in the formulation of the draft that we have. What we'd like to do tonight is basically review the highlights of, I think, basically three articles. One would be a new bylaw dealing with the budget development process, but we found that that issue is sort of entwined with other articles, and so Article 1 dealing with town meetings would be modified as a result of our recommendation, as well as Article 4 with the Finance Committee in more because in that case, because we have some provisions in the bylaw article dealing with the budget development that's duplicated in the Finance Committee bylaw. So, and in some cases we've enhanced the language. So we'll talk about that as well. So we need to later on, in a subsequent meeting, sort of finalize these articles and that at least we're prepared to go back and meet with the select board, the finance committee, the finance officers, the school committee, town administrator, on dealing with the details, and hoping that in those discussions, we have, good suggestions back for improvement if that's the case. But in the end, we will then be able to develop a final proposal budget development process, which at this point in time, I think we think would be a full package for an annual town meeting. And we have other issues that we'll deal with in the end, but we'd like to wrap this up. So this is, I think, going to be a good start to basically deal with the highlights, not all the details, but the highlights, so you get a better sense as to the direction we're going, and then talk more about this before we break off to go into our regular meeting. You continue your meeting. In terms of starting this, makes sense to start with Article 1, which is town meetings, and for that, Paul LeBeau will make the presentation.
All right, if I may, thank you, Sam. As Sam said, we've developed some changes to Article 1, which covers town meetings. And I think especially with this particular proposed change, in addition to all the people Sam mentioned who we want to review it with, this would also, we would want to review with the moderator and the town clerk.
Right.
What we're proposing is that we change the start date of the Springtown meeting to the second Monday in May. The language right now reads the first Monday after the first Friday, which always sounded to me like a religious holiday. So we tried to clarify that. Part of the reason for that, it goes back to the budget development article that Sam will talk about. By moving the beginning of the Springtown meeting to the second Monday in May, it adds on average each year about 4 days to the budget process timeline, which we think would be helpful under the proposed language for the budget development. We're also suggesting that the fall town meeting be moved to the third Monday in October. Right now, the language calls for it to be I think the last Monday in October, unless the last Monday is a holiday. So rather than, dealing with that, we just thought we'd make it a straightforward third Monday of October. Also,
Could I interrupt, Paul?
Yeah,
If I could just
please.
for a point of clarification, I know we'll ask questions in a bit, but on that point, one of the things we're going to explore on December 5th, Paul, is the experiment of having a town meeting on a Saturday. Are you folks mindful of that, to see if that might influence whether or not you carry forward with the idea of keeping it on Mondays going forward? Do you see any benefit of observing what kind of turnout and response we might get from moving it to a Saturday? Is that meaningful to you?
Well, if I could, I've seen other towns do it. I don't know how they've addressed the fact that for at least, one religious group, that's a significant day of the week. So it certainly makes sense in the time of COVID, with all the issues you have to deal with the schools. Going forward, I don't know. I think you'd want to address the issue of the Saturday being a significant day of the week for some religious groups.
Thanks, Paul.
We've also proposed language to be added to Article 1, which would make it clear that both the spring and fall town meetings, regularly scheduled meetings, they both are part of the annual town meeting. That has been, language to that effect has been in the bylaw, but the practice has been for the town to treat the fall town meeting as a special town meeting. But we feel as though we should confirm that they're both part of the annual town meeting process. there would be at least two impacts from that. One would be that the citizens petition process would change from 100 signatures for a special town meeting to 10 signatures for an annual town meeting. And the second would be that it would appear to eliminate the select board's, the necessity of the select board allowing a bylaw change to go forward at the fall town meeting. Other than that, most of the language changes we put in are relatively minor, mostly to do with notice requirements. And one, I guess, potentially significant change is we're suggesting that the requirement for publishing a legal notice in a print newspaper be eliminated. That does not seem to be necessary in the current environment. What we are proposing in the bylaw language is that the town's website be the primary notice, point of notice to the residents regarding town meetings. And beyond that, we made one very significant change in section 17 adjournment. Right now, there's just a typo in there, which makes 11 look like number 1, Roman numeral 1. And we couldn't figure if anybody could find that on a clock, and there may be a problem adjourning a meeting. So we changed that Roman numeral 1 to a number 1, and kept the language that no new articles can be addressed after 11 p.m. without a vote of the meeting. And I think those are pretty much the highlights of the proposed changes to Article 1. And I also just want to mention, again, Sam talked a bit about the work we've done. One of the things that we've posted on our page of the town's website, in addition to the 15 towns that we used as comparison, is we put together a comprehensive organizational chart of the town, which is available on the governance committee's page on the town's website.
Yeah, I think if this is Sam, if I may, the only thing I would add to that is in terms of the Springtown meeting in May, changing that to the second Monday. We would have liked to have given more time for budget development, but if we get closer to the third Monday, that's too close to an election, and we didn't want to keep changing other dates. So we just added one more week. So that's Article 1, the sort of bylaw article dealing with the budget development. Scott is going to make that presentation.
Thanks, Sam. And thank you, Select Board, for having us in again, and happy early Thanksgiving. If I forget, just want to make sure I thank everybody and wish everybody a good Thanksgiving coming up. We all deserve it. I know that. So as Sam said, you know, the budget development article that we've been working on is very important. And in speaking to the 15 or so towns, its best practices are pretty clear that having a bylaw outlining the process is critical. It's critical for the existing members, i.e. the select board members, town officials, finance committee and whatnot. So they have a guideline to work with, but it's also critical, and it's come up in a few towns we've talked to, for transition purposes. We all know people leave, people come, people go, and having something, an article outlining the process. Some of the other town administrators we've talked to swear that it was the best thing that they've ever had, and you know, it certainly helped. So that being said, I'm just going to run through some of the highlights, not getting very detailed because we're still working that out. But some of the highlights would be, you know, proposing a budget process that clearly involves active roles by the town administrator, select board, and the finance committee. Those three are critical components, no question about it. But we'd like to start the budget planning, having key officials meet in early October and to put their goals together and talk about possible dates in the upcoming year. From there, we'd have the budget calendar set by the town administrator by the end of October. And with that in mind, have set dates by the town administrator to submit proposal budgets to the select board, which then would be submitted and proposed to the finance committee. We're also planning on having both the operating and the capital budget adopted in the Springtown meeting. We'll talk about the capital budget in a minute, but having those done at the same time. Again, best practices, we found that having any financial impact to the town be discussed in the Springtown meeting. The budget message, which is a critical component by the state's requirement, will be prepared by the town administrator. The state requires the budget for operating and capital items be included. Where the finance committee's roles in the budget, where advise and consent, we're making sure that those are clearly outlined, and we'll get their input as well. And probably one of the biggest changes we're looking to do or additions is establishing a capital planning committee with several appointees, if you will, from various areas from the town. And in addition to handling the capital planning, to be responsible for the 5-year plan as well. The town administrator would approve warrants going forward. We think that makes sense. Again, that's best practices that we've seen. So those are the highlights. I know I named quite a few of them. I think our next steps will be reaching out to the various parties within the town, soliciting feedback, and hopefully coming up with a document that will serve the town well, and as well as the town boards and finance committees, so they have something that they can rely on, look to, and have schedules that make sense.
Hey, Scott, quick question. You mentioned the capital committee, and I missed the part of where it's seen that is landing under some of your thinking.
Landing in what sense?
Did you suggest that? I'm sorry. Did you suggest that what direction you might be looking to move or change that going forward?
Well, yes, it will be a standalone capital committee with appointees coming from, again, not getting into the details, probably a representative from the select board, from the finance committee, from the school committee, and then having some other members in the town be able to appoint members. So it'll be a view from many, or several, I should say, not too many, that would serve the town well.
Would it be chaired or controlled by one individual?
I don't know if we've got that. The de facto overseer is the town administrator, but he won't be a member. I'm not sure if there'll be a chair. Sam, do you recall if we got into the details on?
I think there is a chair, and its purpose is to provide the information that would help the town administrator and the finance committee separately develop capital budgets. So the finance committee has a subcommittee right now. We found this capital planning committee is pretty common in terms of a lot of the towns that we looked at. And I know the finance committee has broadened its subcommittee, but it's still just the finance committee members that vote on this. We've also seen towns where the capital planning committee actually presents the budget at town meeting, and the town administrator and basically finance committee is not that much involved. That's not the case here. This is really a a committee that's working during the course of the year to help the information that would be used by the town administrator in presenting a capital budget. And it would be a resource to the finance committee as well.
Thank you.
The third article that we've looked at, and I mentioned before that because we've created this draft of a budget development article, it sort of duplicates a little bit what is in the finance committee Article 4. And so changes to that article from us would be the first 3 sections are not changed at all. So the number of members, how they're selected is not changed. The 4th section, which really identifies or describes the responsibilities of the finance committee, is replaced by I think, more robust, not in terms of added responsibilities, but I guess more detailed description of the responsibilities. So it's clearer. And then I guess the next 3 sections of the article are taken out or basically deleted because they are replicated in the budget development bylaw. So in actuality, I think we've basically kept the same responsibilities of the finance committee to be that objective, independent organization that reviews the finance and other management issues and makes its recommendation, town meeting. So that doesn't change. The independence, the objectivity, the thorough analysis remains intact. So that's pretty much those 3 articles. We've got other issues we're contemplating looking at. I mean, one of the things we obviously want to look at, given some of the statements we've made in the past, is that, the town administrator position, in 1994, it was very limited in its scope in order to secure approval, and even more, less scope than town administrators in other towns at that same time. Obviously times have changed, so we want to look at that. I think the Board of Assessors tied into sort of the financial team. And, there are a number of different options that we've seen in other towns that we're looking at, and we'll probably come back with recommendations along that. But I think for the next Springtown meeting, it will really just focus on these 3 articles dealing with the budget. There's a 4th article, but it ties into it's a really small dealing with talent forms. So but it is somewhat tied into right now the finance committee's article, which requires a page to be printed at where individuals can volunteer to serve. I think the talent form that we're looking at will be through the website, and a much better process that provides a lot more information, but on the scope of things, it's a small little thing. So for the annual town meeting in May, we'll be back after having had a lot more discussions on all the details, so that we have input from all the people that we've talked to before, and as Paul mentioned, others that might be affected or would be worthwhile talking to, as well as public, meetings, so that we have a full sort of hearing of comments back before we make any decisions on final proposals to make. But certainly in time for the town meeting in May. So that's the plan, and that's the sort of the overall summary so far. And we'll be back with all the details, so we can hash those out later on.
At the expense of time, Sam, if you're okay, I'll allow members of the select board to maybe ask a couple of questions in the event that it may add some clarity to where you guys are going.
Sure.
I'll start with Mr. Sparrow if he's got any questions of the governance committee at this point.
Sure, I have a couple quick questions. And I do recognize that this presentation is a little, is a very high level, so I don't expect you to get into the weeds, and I'm not trying to get into the weeds either on the details because we don't have a firm proposal in front of us. So I appreciate all the work that you're doing and looking at some of these things, and I think it's important and useful. So thank you very much for that. So I think what I want to just ask briefly about is you had spoken about looking to have the budget development taking place for the May town meeting, and that would include the capital budget. So there's two questions that I have with respect to that. The first is what would you see with the role of the October meeting be if we were moving capital decisions to May? And then the second piece of that is that it's more of a comment, is that the fact that we do a lot of what we do in October with respect to capital because that's when we get the free cash certification. So we have a little more flexibility, and we have some, I guess you could say that's partially answers the first question, which is basically what do we do with free cash. But I just was wondering if you had had any thoughts about that or comments that you want to make, or if it's too soon, then I will accept that it's too soon. So what did you think?
Well, so Sam, if this comes before the May town meeting and is approved, it really can't take effect in the next annual town meeting. So, it's possible that you still may go forward with the October town meeting and deal with the capital budget for that. But then, at the next annual town meeting, if these articles are approved, then it would be done at the annual town meeting.
All right, Scott, I think,
Presumption anyway.
I think, Ben, where you're going is what would be the, right now we bifurcated into the two town meetings. If we combine it into one, what will be discussed in the fall town meeting? Is that where you're going?
Yeah, that's kind of where I'm going. And then just also making sure we're considering the fact that we do a lot of capital work in October, and we've sort of seen that as a time for discussing capital because of the free cash certification that takes place after the fiscal year ends.
Yeah, no, again, most of the towns we spoke to have combined anything to do with the financing, the operating budget and or the capital budget, and have that discussed in one town meeting because it's still related to funding, if you will. So we haven't got into the weeds that much, but that's kind of the premise behind it. It's financing is financing. Why do we split it out now? I understand the free cash piece, but still there's this 5-year plan. 5-year plan is not going to change from, one town meeting to the next. And the capital items should be pretty much laid out, well in advance. So that's where our thinking comes from.
Okay. Yeah, so that's all I have. Thank you. Thank you very much, and have a happy Thanksgiving.
Yeah, you too.
Tina,
Can you guys hear me okay?
We can, yes.
Okay, so I have two questions. The first is for Linda Marshall, actually. She's on the call, so I'll ask the question and maybe we can come back around in case she needs a minute to get ready to answer. But in terms of Article 1 and the changes to town meeting and having no legal notice in print, it sounds totally fine and reasonable. My only question would be, and I pose this to Linda Marshall because she's in really close contact, obviously, through her role with all the seniors. In terms of a non-digital native, someone who's not familiar with accessing information on the internet, how do they access this information if they don't have sorry, Linda, I think Paul's going to answer the question. Go ahead.
Yeah, Paul LeBeau, if I could. The proposed language simply eliminates
Okay.
legal notice in the newspaper, print newspaper.
Yep.
we would continue the requirement that printed copies of the warrant and the Finance Committee report are available at a variety of public buildings.
Okay,
So that, you know, as you say, people who just don't use the internet for whatever reason would have access to a printed copy.
okay. Linda, I see you're unmuted there. I think, do you have anything you want to add or?
Well, this is Sam. Let me add that, you know, one of the sites cited in the article would be the senior center as a
Yeah.
location as to where these reports would be distributed.
Okay. Okay, then my second question is, in terms of Article 2, I'm hearing a lot of great things. I know you're just starting to get into the weeds, as you say. Would you also deliver an implementation plan? So there are probably going to be overlaps and gaps while we move into what you're proposing, assuming the article were to pass. So would you offer an implementation plan for how to adopt what you're proposing for budget development so that we can smoothly transition out of the way it's currently done into the way that it will be done? Is that something you talked about?
So Sam, we haven't talked about it, but that doesn't mean we can't, you know, provide it. There would be able to do that.
Okay, thank you. I think I'd be looking for something like that to sort of plan out how the changes are going to be implemented. You know, what comes up first with the next town meeting that's on the docket, on the schedule.
Right.
Okay,
That's all,
I don't
thank you.
have any, thank you, Tina. I don't have any specific questions on your presentation. I'm greatly encouraged by the path you're taking towards these three elements for the spring. That's great. One thing I would ask you to consider, Sam, through your committee's work, because you have 3-year charges to accomplish the work that I think is in front of you, is to perhaps draft a long-term view of what your committee is looking to do over the next 2.75 years. You alluded to some future needs to examine the financial team and the role of the town administrator and so forth, but it would be helpful for us to see where is this heading in year 2, year 3, and so forth. As a long-term plan, I think it would be helpful for planning purposes. Could I ask for that?
This is Sam. Well, you have already. I think that, which we will do, but our focus was really to try to finish the work on this budget development process and how it affected other articles and be prepared to the annual town meeting. So that was and has been our sole focus. Once that's done, we'll be better able to then look at the big picture in terms of long term. And we've had some discussions about some upcoming articles that we want to look at with governance. But again, the focus has really been on the budget process, and we're done that, and these other steps we can get to in terms of long-term plan.
I believe we have a couple of questions from folks on the Zoom call. We'll start with Dan Alford. Good evening, Dan.
Hi, how you doing, Mr. Chair? Thank you. I just
Go
want,
ahead with your question.
yeah, if I might, about the capital, to circle back to Ben's question. Scott, if you guys could maybe have someone get in touch with the finance committee to discuss sort of the mechanics around that, because doing it all in May, I'd be interested to hear how the other towns do it. But despite even having a 5-year plan, once we do have it, right, I'm sure that there will always be more things that come up, and we do use a significant amount of free cash to supplement the capital set aside that we do in May. I mean, we already do some capital in May, right? If you need a new snow plow for the winter, right, we make sure we order that because it's got a 6-month lead time or something. So I just if we could make sure we collaborate a little bit more with the finance committee, as far as that goes, because it's I mean, I know you were on the finance committee, but it feels like saying that May is when we do capital could be difficult at times.
I think we'll find pluses and minuses. I don't disagree. But I think what we've seen is there's more pluses to do it all at once. But certainly we will get in touch with you guys and get your feedback without a doubt.
I would just say that just because other towns do it does not necessarily mean it's the best way of doing it.
No. Of course not.
Yeah. Thank you.
Dan?
Just as long as let's more conversation about it offline.
This is Sam. Let me just add, because I know Ann Louise has got a question. This is not just one town we're looking at. We've got 15 to 20 towns that we're looking at on a regular basis. And this is pretty consistent in terms of those towns. So this is more of the standard approach than dividing it up. But we'll be happy to, reach out to them and learn more and be able to get back to you about how that works.
Right, sure, but most towns also aren't, on the path to fully funding their OPEB. I mean, they're just because I'm just saying, just because everybody is doing something does not mean it necessarily is the right way. So if we can just be more collaborative, that would be great. That's all I'm asking.
Yep.
Ann Louise, you have a question. Good evening.
Hi, thank you very much. Ann Louise Hanstead from the school committee. I confess I did not have an opportunity to hear the full preamble on the potential change in town meeting, and I know there will be more presentation on that. But considering the school's very significant capital requirements year after year, I'd really love for us to be able to understand this a little bit more offline as well, and also share with you, Sam, how we approach our capital planning. We did some of that with you, but I think it would be helpful, because the only thing that worries me about this is that there are some things that actually we would prefer to have in May. And so we've worked with the town to make that work. And it's almost off cycle for the town given the current approach. And yet there's other things that we need to do in the fall as well. So that timing can be a challenge. So it would be great if we could speak with you offline as well.
This is Sam. That's fully intended. We have met with the school committee once. We do plan to come back. Having some of these issues raised now is helpful, because then we can do more homework before we come and meet and be better prepared to answer the questions. So this has been helpful for that reason.
Terrific. Thank you so much.
Any other questions from folks assembled on the Zoom for our governance committee this evening? Okay, I'm going to have Mr. Ahern give us a brief update relative to the DLS technical assistance portion of this discussion.
Great, thank you. And so obviously, as everybody else has discussed with the governance committee, I've also had the chance to sit down with them and follow along. One of the points that was brought up was that there is a group within the state Division of Local Services, which we refer to as DLS, that has a technical assistance bureau that would provide a free of cost to the town review of our operations. They can look at specific operations of the town when it comes to capital planning, financial policies, forecasting, government operations in general, or they could do a sort of overarching review of the town. I think one thing that, I think that there is value in doing that. I think there's an engagement period that what I'd be looking for right now is support from the select board to essentially put our name in the queue to get on the list for DLS to come in at some point in the future and review a number of the things that the governance committee is looking at, a number of things that I, as a new town administrator, are looking at. And so at this point, I think, as I said, there are multiple ways to go about it. It could be a total look of the town, or it could be more of a narrow focus, I would say, because of the good work that the governance committee is doing. I would say that, we take the opportunity to get on the list for the Technical Assistance Bureau, ask for a total look, get ourselves in the queue. The estimate that I got from the individual who runs that group would be that they could probably get to us by July of next year. And so if the select board was amenable, I would have a vote for you to authorize me to put the town in the queue, get that going, and we would expect them to be here sometime in July. Their process would be to sit down with select board members. They probably want to talk to the governance committee directly as well. Myself, department heads, the finance committee, they want to sit down with the capital planning committee, and I would help them sort of set up all those meetings. I would make sure that they're getting the information they need. It would take a couple months for them to turn around a report back to the town for any recommendations or findings that they would have.
How would that scheduling impact any recommendations that the governance committee outlined this evening that may be forthcoming in May?
I think because of this work that's going on right now, I think a number of the items that DLS would be looking at, you know, they would be, some of the questions would be the same. I think this would probably be a scope outside of just the bylaws as well, in terms of looking, you know, in terms of my office, how it's running. HR comes to mind as one thing that I've sort of focused on since I've been here. That's not necessarily something that will be solved by the governance committee. That may be more of an operational standpoint that they could give us a recommendation on. So I think there would certainly be parallels in some areas, but there would also be additional benefits that we could get.
So with permission of the board, would the governance committee have access to DLS advisors in preparation for any work that would be coming forth in May, sort of in consideration of what would happen in July? So there's a bit of a tethered link there.
Sure.
Are they available? Okay.
Yeah, and DLS is very supportive of cities and towns, and I'm sure they'd be very interested in sort of any assistance that they could give to the governance committee, or any questions that they have. They have quite a few, reports out there for cities and towns. Actually, the last time they did a report for the town of Holliston was 1988. But they have done, they give guidance on an annual basis, on a semi-regular basis. And this was really a service that they have, that they'll come in and look at your town and give you recommendations.
If I could add,
Who's speaking?
I was to say, I'm sorry. Travis is correct in that in 1987, the Division of Local Services had a different name than Technical Assistance Bureau, but they did come out to Holliston and basically help confirm what we had already, we being the government study committee, had already decided we were going to propose, but it was very helpful to have the independent expert group from the Division of Local Services come and look as well. And it does, so I would concur, and I think we all would as a committee concur that, the big picture, big approach in terms of their work would be very helpful. And I don't know that it'll really, I don't know that it'll make any difference in terms of what we'll recommend for the May 2021 town meeting in terms of the budget process, but there are certainly a lot of other areas and findings that will be helpful. Even their report of 1988 still has some relevance. So it's good work, and the town would really benefit by this process. And John, I should also say that the committee has its own relationships with the Division of Local Services, so don't worry about us.
Excellent. All right. At this point, I will.
That request is what.
Got it. Okay. I will entertain a motion from the Select Board to allow the town administrator to engage the State's Division of Local Services Technical Assistance Bureau to make a request for their assistance in preparation for review of Town Holliston's government functions.
So moved.
Do I have a second?
I'll second that. This is T9.
Thank you, Tina. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
That
Aye.
carries. Thank you. Okay, you got that?
Thank you.
Very good. Anything else to add, Sam, before we let you folks move on to your meeting?
No, I think that this is Sam. That pretty much covers it in terms of what we needed to accomplish today. And we again, our focus is going to be on the whole budget development process and the various articles that are affected by that, until the next annual town meeting in May. We also will have time to deal with other issues in terms of the research that we undertake, so that we'll be prepared for the town meeting after that as well.
Well, on behalf of the Select Board, thanks so much for the work you folks are doing. It sounds extensive, involved, and very thorough. We thank you. I hope you all enjoy your holiday, and we look forward to hearing from you soon, probably before the end of the calendar year, but maybe after that. You let us know when you're ready.
Okay, will do. And on behalf of the Governance Committee, I hope everybody, the Select Board and others, have a happy Thanksgiving. our meeting will continue, and there's a separate Zoom credentials for that, but that's in the agenda. So we'll all reconvene in a few minutes.
Thanks,
Thank
guys.
you all.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
We're going to move on in our agenda to the coronavirus community update from our emergency management director and fire chief, Mike Cassidy. He's positioning himself strategically.
Good evening, and
Good evening.
thank you for having me. We passed a difficult milestone over the weekend. We are now over 200 cases since we began tracking back in the spring, which actually means that we have doubled the number of cases in town since the beginning of October. So that certainly is an escalation in terms of the pace by which new cases are being reported. So that's something we certainly want to be aware of and continue to do everything we can locally to stop the new cases. As of tonight, we have 209 total cases. We have 173 who've recovered, which includes 2 fatalities, and 34 active as of tonight. With regards to the 34 active in the last month, we've gone from 31 active on the 2nd, 29 active on the 9th, and 34 last week on the 16th. So we're right around that 30, just over 30 active cases on Monday evenings for about a month's time. The good news is that when the Department of Public Health issued their weekly report last Thursday for the 2nd week in a row, our percent positivity number was lower than the prior week. So we are certainly hoping that we continue to trend in the downward direction. Social media topics this week that we're focusing on with the different social media splash that we're doing is hand washing, stop the spread, COVID stops with me, and obviously some holiday safety, because we want to do everything that we can to ensure that people celebrate Thanksgiving safely, but in a way that does not impact the health or safety of people outside of their household. And that's it for the high-level overview.
Any questions on that, Ben?
Yeah, I have 2 questions. What is the percentage of positive?
As of Thursday, we were 2.38% positivity.
Okay, so we were 242 last week, and now we're 238, so we're hovering right around there. So it sounds like a lot of what's happening is we're capturing a lot more people in the testing process, so we're catching. Yeah,
we're seeing about 800 to 900 individuals testing per week. Mm-hmm. And so even though we continue to have a high case count, because we have more testing, the positivity number comes down just slightly.
Right.
We're probably going to continue to see high test rates, especially we've seen that statewide a rush on tests in the last week. Mm-hmm. A lot of testing locations had to shut off the line because they were overwhelmed because people were trying to test so that they could travel. Even though it's not advised that they travel for the holiday. Sure. So, yeah, we'll continue to see high test numbers, yes. Which will align well with our high positive case count.
And we're still in the yellow?
We are still in the yellow, and based on our numbers, I anticipate that when they issue their updated report at the tail end of the week, it will not be Thursday. PPH has indicated that they will not be publishing that report on Thursday. I anticipate that we will still be in the yellow at the end of the week.
And my last question is if someone came to you and said, I want to get a test, what would you recommend to them on how to find availability?
So the state has a lot of resources on their website, and I would encourage them, if possible, to go to one of the Stop the Spread free sites, which is free to any Massachusetts resident. Okay. There's no insurance requirement. Because the state has a lot more control over those results, both when they're coming back as well as when they get entered into the Maven reporting system. Some of the challenges for some of the tests that take place at some doctors or other large chains is sometimes those are being run by large nationwide labs, and with such a surge nationwide, some of those lab results could be significantly delayed. Both the results coming back to the individual as well as being entered into the reporting system and for tracking purposes. Okay.
Good. Thank you very much.
Tina, questions for Chief Stone?
This is Tina. No questions. Just would say I miss my view on the other side of the table. as I sit here in quarantine in Canada, in a city in lockdown, but also miss being there with you guys tonight. Thanks for the update, Chief.
Chief, just a quick question, if you could, you don't traditionally give us an update on how the schools are doing overall, but if you could give us a peek into how the schools are functioning as they approach the midpoint of the semester and how things are going with their positivity and testing and so forth.
Sure. So obviously, I would not wish to speak on behalf of the schools, and you do have school people both present in the room as well as on the call. But I think they're doing a great job in terms of their ability to find that balance between in-person versus remote learning, and their ability to keep people distanced, to practice all the appropriate mitigation measures. We really have low case numbers associated with our schools. Like other schools, both in the Commonwealth as throughout the country, we are not seeing a transmission of the disease taking place in the schools. So I think they're doing very well in terms of their ability to keep students and staff members safe in the buildings. And the trends that they see nationwide is that usually the positivity rate is lower for students in school than it is for students who are out of school. Just because when they're in school, they're compliant. When they're out of school, they tend to not be wearing their mask as often. They tend to be closer to their peers. And so I think the current model that they have for instructional delivery is working out very, very well for the community.
Great. Any questions on the Zoom call for Chief Cassidy regarding the coronavirus community update? Hearing none, we will move on to the CARES Act programmatic update. Chief.
I do not have any requests for the board this evening. I have some in the pipeline, but nothing that we need to act on this evening.
Very good. Any questions on the CARES Act programmatic issues from anybody on the Zoom? None. We will move on. Thank you,
Great.
Chief.
Thank you.
Appreciate your update.
Absolutely.
We'll go on to the warrants on our agenda.
Just one.
Mr. Sterl, how are you tonight?
Oh, living the dream here, Mr. Chair. So I will make a motion to approve this warrant in the amount of $1,797,182.28. Of that, $1,210,366.55 is town payroll.
I'll second
I
that.
have a
This is Tina.
Thank you, Tina. There's a second. All those in favor say aye.
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 Tina Hine, aye.
Thank you, Tina. We are now moving on to public comment. Mr. Sparrow.
Just two things. The first is just a reminder that next week is fall curbside leaf pickup. E.L. Harvey will be picking up leaves the week of November 30th. And if you need more information, you can go to the website to find out more information. But it's next week, so I just wanted to make sure people were reminded of that one last time. And my second comment is I just hope everybody stays safe and makes good decisions over the Thanksgiving break. I think about it. My wife works in the schools, and I want to keep the schools open. So all these decisions that we're making as a community are to help each other, and I just want to make sure that everybody makes good choices and has a happy holiday and enjoys themselves and fills themselves up with turkey and stays socially distant as much as possible so we can keep the schools open and we can stay safe. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Ben. Tina, any public comment?
Well, it's Thanksgiving week, so I'll give thanks for the strong faith community that we have here in Holliston. And having said that, this evening during public comment, I'd like to welcome Rabbi Mimi Michner. Rabbi Mimi Michner is Holliston's newest faith leader after joining Temple Beth Torah this past July. This is her first congregation. Rabbi Michner, is a Vancouver native who found her way to Holliston after arriving in Vermont for her college years some time ago. Rabbi Michner is on the call, and we spoke earlier, and if she'd like to have the opportunity to introduce herself to the community, I told her she could have the floor of public comment to do so. So if we just hold and give her a chance to get on the call if she'd like to.
I am here. Thank you. Thank you so much for that introduction, and thank you so much for having me. I'm here right after we had our Thanksgiving interfaith service yesterday, and it just exemplified to me what it has felt like to be beginning to be part of this community, which is that it's been a real welcoming embrace. And what, the image that comes to mind from my tradition that I wanted to offer was an image that might be sort of known to you, the image of the Jewish wedding canopy, which is called a chuppah. You might have been to a Jewish wedding, you might have seen it on TV, sort of a canopy with 4 poles and no walls. And whenever I do a wedding for a couple, the thing that I like to say about the wedding canopy is that it's the symbol for the couple's new home. And what's curious about it being a symbol of a new home is that it's a home without walls. So why is it that we call it a home without walls? What I like to say to couples is that that they should look around at all of the people who are with them at their wedding, all of the people who helped them reach that moment in their lives, their friends, their family, their community. And those are really the walls of your home. That really the strength of your home, the real sort of rootedness of your home is going to come from the people in your life, the people who are embracing you in your life. And that is what I have felt by this community so far, that real sense of embrace by people, a real strength of its people. I felt that very much at TBT itself, a very strong and welcoming community, and in the wider community here in Holliston as well. So thank you again for having me and for welcoming me so nicely.
Have a wonderful Thanksgiving, Rabbi. It's nice to see you.
Thank you, and the same to all.
Rabbi Michner, thanks so much for introducing yourself on our call this evening. Very kind words, and I think you'll find that the community spirit you experienced is ongoing throughout the year. You're among very special people in a very special community, and my very best to you and your congregation going forward. Ben, any comments?
No, just welcome, and thank you for those words, and I hope you have a wonderful Thanksgiving and enjoy living in Holliston. We love it here too, and we hope you share that with us. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
All the best. Tina, are you good on open comment, public comment, excuse me?
I'm all set. Thank you.
Okay, the only thing I wanted to bring up, Travis, you can add some detail to this, is to let any citizens know listening that all documents associated with the upcoming special town meeting on December 5th have been uploaded onto our website. That includes messages, warrants, and related information associated with what folks will see and read on December 5th. So we encourage them to access the information, familiarize themselves with the details, and get ready for December 5th meeting. Anything to add to that? Nope. Okay, great. We will move on. Last week we opened up a discussion relative to a town meeting quorum. As folks know, the Special Act of the Commonwealth enables select boards to discuss and reset, if they're interested in, changing the quorum needed for town meeting. We had a brief conversation last week as a board. Ms. Hine asked for an opportunity to have the information relative to the warrant posted on our website to give people a chance to see and read and become familiar with the content before and if we took up any such discussion on a quorum change. So at this point, I'll turn to Mr. Sparrow and then Ms. Hine to get their sense on what they are leaning towards for any change for a town meeting quorum on December 5th. Mr. Sparrow.
So the first comment I have is I know there were a couple town meetings some communities had, I think, last week. Did we find out, or do we know how their attendance was? Was it like, I mean, if we don't have the information, that's fine.
I don't have information on their specific attendance. I have not heard of any issues. I think, we all have a Chief Cassidy. Nobody has our Chief Cassidy, but they're all following similar guidelines.
Sure.
And I think that they went off without a hitch, I would say.
Okay.
But I don't have specifics to
I was just curious if they saw 75% of normal attendance or something like that. I think just, as I've been thinking about this, I use that number because that's kind of how I'm leaning. As I'm leaning more towards like a quorum of like around 75 is kind of where I'm leaning. Personally, I can be convinced otherwise, but I feel if we start getting lower, I have concerns about feeling that there's enough participation to be able to conduct the business, but I also want to make sure we have that balance with making sure that, like, for example, in July, we were at 107, and we were worried if a couple people went to the bathroom, then suddenly we were going to be below quorum. So I don't want to see that scenario either. But I also want to make sure that we have enough, we really, I think the spirit of town meeting is important to ensure that we have citizen input, and if we can't get to a certain level, I think it behooves us to sort of reconsider the circumstances. And I believe I think we're going to do, it's going to be safe. I think it's going to be a good town meeting. I think it'll move pretty smoothly and quickly, but my personal feeling is I'm leaning towards around a 75 point.
Tina?
Yeah, so I hear what Ben's saying. 75 sounds great. I'm also, though, thinking of what Chief Cassidy had to say last week in terms of his recommendation that came from discussions he'd had with the town clerk and others from our July town meeting, where they felt 50 was a really comfortable number, where they felt business could get done and we weren't going to have staff at the doors counting to make sure. It sounds like that was a bit of a concern coming out of the July town meeting. I am grateful and thank you, Travis, for taking the time to make sure the warrant was posted for people to review. I have not received significant concerns from residents to say that there are articles here that they really feel need to have a very large turnout for. I'm quite confident that we will meet our quorum. But given Chief Cassidy's comments of last week, I'm inclined for 50 to 75 as a reduction in the quorum number. If you need a particular number, I can give that, but that's sort of where I'm leaning right now, John.
Okay. Chief, Tina brings up your comments from last week, and I thought for the benefit of revisiting the information you shared, you could bring it back for the assembled folks tonight. Give us a sense of what kind of conversations you had, and any intel to Ben's point about what other communities might be doing with quorums. Any wisdom would be appreciated.
Great, thank you. Yes, so going into the July town meeting, the town clerk, the town moderator, and I had a discussion, and we were inclined to suggest a reduced quorum for May, which became July, to 75. However, due to the notice requirements before the board could take action on that, we ran up against the deadline, and so we were stuck with the 100, which is required in our bylaws. As indicated, there were some logistic issues that evening, and we were, without violating fire codes, we were trying to bar the doors as best as possible to keep everyone in the room so that we could conduct business. We were in a very different coronavirus local condition back in July when we held the meeting. We have a lot more active cases. Our positivity rate is significantly higher than it was back in July. That's what prompted...
Just briefly, tell us those numbers again. They did come out previously, but let folks know what it was, what they are.
Right, so our positivity rate back in July was less than 1%. Right now we're just below 2.5%. And so based on our conversation with the moderator a few weeks ago, it was his suggestion that that we bring to you 50. And again, I just want to be clear, because there seems to be a little bit of confusion when some people hear, and also it's compounded by the language that the legislature put in when it said not less than 10% of. It has never been our suggestion that we lower the quorum to 10. And even if we were to lower the quorum to either 50 or 75, that's just the minimum number to conduct business. If 140 people show up, we will still be able to conduct the town meeting. So we're not trying to disenfranchise anyone, but at the same time, we want people to feel safe. And if there's a particular neighborhood that's very concerned about a hot topic, perhaps they can talk amongst themselves and say, instead of 40 of us going, let's pick a handful to represent our neighborhood that can be the most articulate, rather than having to have a long succession of people all from the same neighborhood repeating the same talking points. If they can designate one or two people to be their spokespersons, that would help to make the meeting more efficient. So sort of a hybrid between a representative town meeting and an open town meeting. But So that's where the recommendation for lowering it to 50 for this special town meeting in December comes from, is we're concerned about the situation with the virus in town compared to where we were back in July. Plus, we just want to make sure that we can conduct business.
Do we know what other communities, Defense Point, might be voting for quorums?
Not for this one. When we surveyed back in June heading into July, a lot of communities had reduced it by 25 to 50%, and yet a lot of them reported, like I would say more than half of them, based on the informal survey that we did, actually saw, even though they'd reduced the quorum, that they had essentially their regular quorum show up. So if they reduced it from 100 to 50, 94 people showed up. Right. So it wasn't a case of like they capped out right where the low number that they set. They still had close to a regular quorum show up nevertheless. You mentioned something in passing. I just wanted to touch on it. If we did end up changing quorum, obviously, but we did have 143 people show up, what kind of contingencies are we making for individuals that may come that would exceed the 142, which is the capacity of the room, as you stated to us previously? So that number of 142 is based on a fixed seating. So we have a little bit of wiggle room with regards to the boards or committees who may be either on the stage or at the front of the room. So I can check the numbers and confirm, but if a 143rd person shows up, we're not going to turn them away, and we'll still be able to do it within the guidelines for safe workplaces. Perhaps we could make use of standing room or something along that line to ensure perhaps social distance and so forth. Yeah. And what we've done in the past is we've also had a large TV out in the lobby. So if there were individuals who perhaps wanted to just be heard on one particular article but didn't wish to sit through the whole thing, they could, in a socially distanced manner, watch the proceedings and then enter the room to speak only when it was time to be heard. Before the board takes any action on this vote, I wanted to see if anyone assembled on the Zoom call has any questions about the matter involving a special town meeting quorum. Anybody? Hearing none. Okay. I'm going to probably land in the Tina Hine area, Ben, of 50, and it's out of an abundance of caution. I actually had 75 in my head when we started this exercise. But when I heard from Chief Cassidy that the moderator was thinking 50, it speaks to the need to conduct the business. And I understand if we had 50, it would be under extreme conditions that we'd have to conduct the business. We're looking at a warrant that happens to have a streamlined number of articles. We think is going to be an efficient, hopefully brief and concise meeting. But we're spending a lot of money. There's a fair amount of expenditures within the various pots of money, and so I don't want to risk not being able to have a proper quorum to conduct the business. So I'm thinking 50, Ben, but I'm very mindful of where you are because that's where I was at the same time. So at this point, why don't we conclude the debate, and I'll entertain a motion for the change of a quorum consistent with the special act for the special town meeting to be held on December 5th, 2020. Ms. Hines, would you like to make the motion?
I'll make a motion that we reduce the quorum for the special town meeting on December 5th to 50 voters.
Are you inclined to make the second on that, or would you like me to?
I'll second it.
Okay, I have a motion and a second to change the quorum to 50 for the special town meeting on December 5th. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed?
Aye.
I'm going to abstain.
And Ben will abstain. Very well. So we have 2 ayes and an abstention on that. And we will set our quorum at 50 for the special town meeting. All right, let's move on to our agenda. Special town meeting warrant discussion. Travis, if you can give us an update on where we stand with the warrant, and just made an announcement that it is available on our website. If you would kindly give us some updates on any activities. I know the Finance Committee met last week and had some decisions that they wanted to make. Fill us in on what happened.
Sure, so I saw you all last Monday night. The warrant was voted, as you discussed, the quorum. We wanted everything up online. Before having had the conversation, the warrant went up online on Tuesday. I then joined the Finance Committee for their vote on Tuesday night. They have supported the majority of articles within the warrant. At the end of their meeting, they did take up, again, Article 1 and 3, which they had previously voted support of the week before. And those two votes essentially have zero impact on the bottom line when it comes to the raise and appropriate, but it would move, in their recommendation, money from Article 3 to Article 1, increasing the FY21 budget adjustments. And I don't want to speak directly for them, so I'm just sort of recapping where it was, but the intent essentially would be to increase the reserve fund supplemental appropriation, which had been, with the way that warrant was written, an additional $40,000, and it would increase that by $200,000, so resulting in $240,000 in this town meeting if the recommendation was approved by town meeting, going into the reserve fund for the rest of the year. And I think part of that had to do
What would it
with,
bring the reserve fund to under their design?
just under $800,000. So $600,000 was the original budget. About $50,000 has been used out of that reserve so far this year for unforeseen reasons, leaving it at about $550,000. Their proposal, the original warrant was written to put $40,000 back into that, so to keep it around the $600,000 from the original budget. This proposal, the recommendation from the Finance Committee would be to add in another $200,000, bringing it to just under $800,000. Again, $100,000 coming from Article 3, another $100,000 coming from lower within Article 1 from the unemployment insurance appropriation or budget adjustment. So when you add Article 1 and 3 together, the net impact to the taxpayer is essentially nil. They balance out. The impact would be $100,000 less going into the stabilization fund, $100,000 more going into the FY21 budget adjustment. The reasoning had a lot to do with their concern over the second half of the year as it relates to school needs that they got an update on previous in the meeting. So I do have just a page that sort of shows that, if you'd like to see it, that I sent earlier. Sure. If you want that. Chris, do you have that? If you could just show sort of the but again, so the way that the warrant is written, which is posted, and the way that the Finance Committee recommendations, the end result is negative, is a zero impact on the taxpayer. It's really just moving money separately between Article 1 and 3. So Chris is going to just load this up.
While he's doing that, I have a question about the use of reserve funds. I thought if, like, let's just say, for example, if we needed to move money back to the unemployment insurance, and we were aware that this was something coming up, it wouldn't necessarily be an unforeseen expense. And I thought the purpose of reserve funds were to handle unforeseen emergency expenses. So if we knew something was coming, shouldn't we budget for it? I thought that was sort of the intention and the separation between reserve and having a budget.
Is the question directed at the town administrator?
Yeah, I did. Because I heard I watched the Finance Committee meeting, and I just wasn't sure. I'd heard, in the past, I've heard them say that, and I just was confused because I didn't know that the rules changed or.
So one of the things I think was ongoing conversations on the need for unemployment insurance. I think one of the things that we're looking at is the trend of where it is right now. The budget. The original budget for the year had been increased from $50,000 from previous years to $100,000. This would put in $250,000, which was, in my opinion, and as I explained to this board and the Finance Committee, what I anticipated to be a high estimate because I want to protect the town in the second half of the fiscal year.
Absolutely.
I think that it's not without merit that the Finance Committee is essentially saying that could be moved up to the to the reserve fund line in case it needs to be used elsewhere. The point that I made and the point that I still would be my opinion is that if the money were not needed under unemployment insurance at the end of the fiscal year, if there were another need, whether it be schools or elsewhere, that the Select Board and then the Finance Committee would both be in a position to approve a line item transfer out of that line in the second half of the year, right?
Right.
And so the mechanism to me was it's not that I'm again there isn't a huge impact on the bottom line when you look at it all. I just that I'm not sure I see the necessity to move it into the reserve fund because as you said, some of the restrictions when it comes to using reserve funds for unforeseen purposes makes it sort of more difficult to make sure that we're getting through this fiscal year.
Right, and I mean, in this particular case, if we did have to move it to unemployment, it was a foreseen issue. We knew about it, and we were trying to think ahead and plan ahead for it.
Correct. We would also then end up moving it back, right, so.
Well, I mean, I understand, yeah, but that's,
It's a great point. If I could just piggyback on
Of
that
course,
for a second. This all relates to CARES Act. I mean, they're concerned about funding obligations in the second half of the year relative to the COVID impact, as this is the last loss of the CARES Act. That's what's driving this. Is that correct?
Well, so I think, we're all looking at essentially making sure that we're set up for the second half of the fiscal year to get through any unforeseen challenges, right? I think, yes.
But
to
the
answer your
best question, if we are looking at the impact of COVID on in this case, a school committee budget, and consequently, the thinking is, well, let's bolster our reserves because of this COVID impact. The question then becomes, does Ben's point come to bear? Can you use CARES, does the CARES Act enable the use of money in advance of, putting money in a reserve to get around the unforeseen definition that Ben just brought up? So I guess the question, if I could ask the chief, because he's our CARES Act contact, to draw out whether or not that's an allowable action. Do we have instructions from A&F or the feds regarding our CARES Act money that would say COVID-related expenses will fit into a reserve fund, transfer, and you may ignore the unforeseen, unexpected definition? If somebody could address that. I'll look at you, Chief. You're the closest to those answers.
Sure, so there's
You want to
nothing.
approach the microphone, please?
Absolutely. So there is nothing in existing A&F guidance for the state or Treasury guidance coming from the federal government that would suggest that sort of use of post-CARES for the unforeseen expenses would be an appropriate use. So CARES funding based on the enabling legislation expires December 30th, and therefore any obligation that's funded that way needs to be completed, substantially benefited by December 30th. So our state regulations with regards to reserve funds and what they can be used for really will continue to be in force as of December 31st. So there has been no guidance that I've seen from A&F, from MMA, from DLS that would suggest that you would be using your reserve fund for coronavirus stuff in 2021.
So in short, putting money into a reserve account for something that is foreseen is a no-no.
Correct.
And there is no escape from that because it may be COVID-related.
Correct. So back in, February, March, before the federal government passed the CARES Act funding, and that was then funneled through to the states for distribution to the locals, obviously there would have been some unbudgeted, unforeseen expenses that came up in the early part of the pandemic that may have met a reserve fund appropriation definition in March, April.
Sure.
But once the funding was made available to local communities in June, and you're allowed to apply them from the beginning of the pandemic, from when the legislation was enacted in March, that really took away a lot of that unanticipated and unforeseen.
Got it. Thanks, Mike. Appreciate that. Part of the discussion, I think, Travis, as you alluded to, seemed to originate with some concerns about the school's funding for the second half of the year. I've asked Keith Bidet to join us this evening and try to give us some updates on what can be done with this funding amount. And also joining us on the Zoom is their chairwoman, Stacy Raffi. I guess my question is, if you could approach Keith, is that Mike Laskris? We good here? Okay. Good evening, Keith. How are you?
Good evening, Jeff.
What we wanted to have a deeper dive on is the nature of the $682,000, which I think was the topic of conversation. If you could briefly explain to folks at home what that is, number one. I'm sure some members of the committee here, the board, will have some questions for you, but in effect, a number was floated as a potential maximum obligation. If you could explain to us what that is, we may have some follow-ups for you.
Yeah, basically, thanks, John. Basically, what we were asked to do is to again, put out that maximum number. Unfortunately, it was a very short time frame. I found out on Monday for the Tuesday meeting.
Sure.
So basically what I did is I rolled forward our original plan for the second half of the year, just to get the quick and dirty back of the envelope type of number.
So that was the total amount of the CARES that was appropriated just to the schools.
Planned for the first half of the year, rolled into the second.
And folks at home should not confuse that dollar amount with the amount that the town has, that Chief Cassidy coordinates. And so these are two different
Two different things,
funding
yeah.
sources.
I mean, Mike and I coordinate, we both made our submissions, last Friday? 2 Fridays, I don't know, my days are all blended together, I can call it. You know, so we're staying hand in glove in this thing, so.
Okay, keep going.
Okay, so what I did this past weekend was I really dug down into each of the numbers. And, you know, this was a gross expenditure number as opposed to talking about any funding sources as well. And the assumptions, there were a few assumptions in the number that we put forward, things such as being at 100% employment, which we have not been. We've had vacant jobs from day one of the school year right through to today. But again, I can't, you know, you can't budget for, or you can, but it would be bad if you did, budget for, you know, 98%, 97%, you know, because again, you don't want to run short. So that's 100% budget for payroll. You know, that's also assuming no CARES for the second half of the year, which again, we don't know. Nobody has visibility into it. Another key assumption is there's no FEMA the second half of the year, which Mike will say that's not his expectation, or may not be, at least for the entire year. You know, Michael makes probably like a 30-day commitment. But, you know, again, that's a big assumption there. And that's actually a much larger assumption than you realize, because as Mike and I found out as we go through this process, that 75% to FEMA is, you know, we are digging into our data now to try to make sure we have enough to cover our CARES money, because that 75% is a big number if you really dig into it. So to make the point, just from FEMA alone, at that 682 number, that took us down to right around 120,000, and that's just for FEMA. So that's, again, that's no CARES. That's FEMA alone puts me at 125, or puts the schools at 125. Another major assumption in that number is that this has not been floated past the school committee at all. There is no vote, there is no subsequent request for money, et cetera. So the funding source says, because you don't fix a big number with a big solution, it's usually a lot of little solutions, at least that's been my experience here. So again, we have a big, potentially a big number that we have to figure out what are going to be the funding solutions. Some may be, you know, FEMA, some may be, you know, well, the other piece is that when I was digging through the numbers as well, a thing changed on the DESE side of things that allows me, where before I had to make an assumption that things like contracts, like software contracts, we acquired a number of pieces of software for teaching the students. That had to end on December 30th. And we had to figure out how to do the second half or cancel the contract. Well, DESE relented. And so the DESE part of A&F is allowing us to put that in the contract. So with our vacancies that we've had so far this year, I was able to move that money back to the first half of the year, which was planned for the second half of the year. I had planned, I know I'm going in a big circle here, the second half of the year, we received an additional grant from DESE, the ESSER grant, to the tune of $54,000. I'm able to offset, that was my first big chunk, off that 682, the $54,000 from that.
Okay.
So now that cut into that number. The second thing I did was I spoke with our cleaning company. We've made some our staffing adjustments to our cleaning company because they've been doing such a great job. They had somebody leave. I said, let's not replace that person yet. Let's run it with this, and we've been keeping up our level of service. So I made a second adjustment there. Between those two adjustments, and actually it was an adjustment up a little bit because in my original projection, I had left out the fact that we had the one weather day, high wind day, that we canceled school. So I had they moved from the first half of the year to the second half of the year. So our payroll actually went up by a little under 1%. So again, a couple of minuses, a couple of pluses. I would project right now our second half of the year number to be right around $579,000. And that's including the offset for the ESSER as a funding source, so $579 now. That would also make, if FEMA was around, for the things that I think are applicable to FEMA, from again working with Mike on this, my FEMA number after FEMA would be down to $67,000 now. So again, I'm not saying it's not a problem, because again, FEMA shuts down on January 5th or something, there's a problem. But again, we have a big problem with possibly a lot of solutions that can resolve that. And I think that that's the approach that, again, I've certainly taken with all the problems I've been through in all my time here. And, again, it's just, kind of where we stand right now, so.
Just to make sure I understand, when you're talking about the FEMA, the 67,000, that 67,000 that FEMA could potentially reimburse based on the existing rules, or the 579 would be reduced to 67 with those FEMA
Number two.
reimbursements?
Number two, right.
So if FEMA continued with the current rules, it would basically offset by $512,000.
Right, because again, the funding sources come off of the gross number is 701, that cuts down to 190, and then the funding sources, we have an appropriation savings.
Sure.
That has always been there for 67,000, and then at the ESSER thing for another 54,000.
And for that 579, do you have you don't have just like a 30,000 foot view? What's in that? Is it
It's mostly personnel.
Mostly personnel.
Mostly personnel. A big chunk again for my cleaning services. That we were going to do that with our own staff.
Yep.
We were going to hire people, and we were unable to find them in that quick date.
Right.
And again, these people are experts at this, so they had a pool of people to call upon. So I went with them. And after that, it's a little bit of PPE, and I can't do certain PPEs because there's the PPE is now basically no longer FEMA-able for us for the type of PPE that we acquire. So. And I can't buy a whole bunch of PPE now and push it out. You have to kind of buy it as you go. So.
Any other questions, Ben?
Not about those numbers, no.
Okay. Tina, do you have any questions for Keith on the reported numbers here?
Questions for him? No, I mean, I have comments from the slide that Travis had up on the screen, John, but I can hold those if you want to continue with Keith with what he has to say.
Okay. So Keith, before we, yeah, hang on one second. We're going to just get my question out of the way, and then we'll go to the screen. Question about the sequence. You mentioned there was no school vote on this. In the event that you were asked to solve a problem associated with a $579,000 item, could you solve it without reserve fund consideration in the second half of fiscal year 21?
I can't.
I'd like to intervene on that question. I'm sorry, John.
I'll recognize you just a second, Ann Louise. I know you have some questions, so stand by if you don't mind.
At that point, it's something that we would work on in a collaborative way with both, first starting with the school committee's budget subcommittee, then presenting it to the school committee. I mean, these types of things it's not my money. You know what I'm saying? It's the town's money, of which the school committee is the custodians of. So this would be a process that we would have to work through.
So what you're offering this evening is perceived to be a revised number of total obligation, which was $682,000 last week, and now it's $579. Is that correct? So there's been a little bit of an adjustment. You explained what you did. Were there any questions from the Finance Committee about ways to refine that last week, or did you need the opportunity of time to get to that?
I think the understanding was that this is something we worked through. Again, the fact is that number is more likely to go down than go up, just based on January 3rd when I don't have full staffing. Hopefully that's a weekday, maybe not. But when I don't have full staffing on that day, that number then goes down. That number, so if I only need 16,000 in PPE, that number goes down. There's pieces of that number that again, and look, it could go the other way. If I have to go buy, sanitizer by the truckload, it's a budget in every situation is today's best estimate. It's an informed estimate, but again, that's where from last Tuesday to this Monday, again, I've had a little time to dig through some more things. Like I said, I spent a lot of time this weekend looking at it because I do have a few other things to do. But,
understood. But to the point that you made earlier, that the school committee itself had not taken any action to support this number and present it to the Finance Committee, we have with us the chairwoman of the school committee this evening, and I just wanted to bring her in to maybe help her loop in as to why there was no vote or where she stands as a committee on this number. Stacy, if you could just share some thoughts on the development of this figure and really where the committee's coming from on this.
So I think that number was a conversation with the the business manager and the budget subcommittee, but it has not come to the full committee. The full committee 2 weeks ago had voted on capital, and that's what we shared with you last Monday. And my understanding is that's what was shared with the finance committee on the Tuesday. So the only vote we have taken is on capital to bring to fall town meeting.
Okay, and I would also add that around that same time period, you, Dr. Kuska, Keith, Mr. Ahern, Chief Cassidy, and myself had a conversation about where things stood relative to the CARES Act for the schools, and that meeting concluded with no exposure reported by the schools at that point. Is that correct?
Correct. Correct. I believe Mr. Boudet, I'm sorry, Keith, said at the time, it is too early to tell. We don't have any information from FEMA or the state or the feds. So he's not gonna make up a number or a problem. He said it's just too early to tell you what we're getting for funding or not.
I see. Okay. Ann Louise, I think you had your hand up first. If you would like to ask a question, go right ahead.
Yes, I want to clarify a few things, starting actually with the meeting that you just referenced, where you invited Dr. Kuska, Mr. Boudet, and our chair, Stacy Raffi, to the table to discuss school finances. Just for the record, nobody from the budget subcommittee was aware that meeting was happening. Nobody had been invited. And it puts us in a very awkward position because with open meeting laws, we're not in a position to then discuss anything with our chair who does not sit on the budget subcommittee. So moving forward, hopefully that won't be the case again. I also want to clarify that nobody from the budget subcommittee was involved in the conversation earlier last week where we were trying to get a number off to the finance committee based on a last minute request. There was no time to post for a budget subcommittee meeting. It was a very, it was sort of a request that I got from the finance committee to get a number to help them just simply understand what the potential exposure might be. And I reiterated exactly what Mr. Boudet said, that it's way too early to tell. Having said that, I worked with Mr. Boudet at 5 p.m., but it wasn't even a day before the school committee, the finance committee meeting last week, to try to, as we say in the sort of private sector, get a number that's, bigger than a bread box, smaller than a Mack truck. And so what I asked for was very specific. I said, if stimulus does not come through, what is the maximum exposure we will have as a district based on nothing more than looking at first half spending minus our sunk costs, meaning take out any expenditures we won't have to repeat in the second half of the year. And there are some sunk costs, most are materials related, not all. So we won't have to reinvest in some things, but there are incremental costs above and beyond our appropriation that were covered through stimulus funds or FEMA. And so that's what I wanted to understand, because I was trying to identify a ceiling that we could then provide to the town to simply understand what that potential exposure might look like. It was not a request for funding, nor was it anything more than a way to put a bookend on a planning scenario. I also asked Keith to try to estimate the lower end if we were to get as much, and not a dollar more, but as much funding as we got from the government for the first half of the year. So that's where the $120,000 and the $680,000 numbers came from. These were high-level preliminary estimates. And I was very clear with Dr. Shada and the Finance Committee that this was preliminary and would need to be refined because we did it rather quickly going into the Finance Committee meeting last week. So I just wanted understood that it was an attempt to protect the town as well as the district from the risk that we might not receive stimulus funding or that it might not come through in time. But it was never intended to be anything more than a guidepost for planning. So that's where the number came from. Now, Mr. Boudet worked through the weekend to try to refine that number and get it down to something a little bit more precise. And in doing so, he looked at everything that sat under the funding that would, the expenses that are incremental and associated with the pandemic. And in fact, some things actually are higher than what we had anticipated, but on balance, other things are lower, for instance, the custodial maintenance costs. So he was able to cull out another $100,000 roughly from that original estimate, which would mean that the initial reserve fund estimate of say 600K, I think, was closer to being on point. So that is how this came about. But we did not have a budget subcommittee meeting to go through this. And that's important because I think it's really critical that the community knows that this has yet to be reviewed in detail, not only with the budget subcommittee, but with the committee at large. Having said that, I'm very
Louise, can I ask you a question for a second? Because you're referring to the school committee budget subcommittee. When was the last meeting you folks had?
I think it was probably about 4 weeks ago.
You had a meeting 4 weeks ago, and you do know that the schools met with us at the invitation of our town administrator to discuss CARES, but you didn't bother to clarify any of the remarks or comments that were made regarding the CARES Act. Go ahead.
Respectfully, we were invited to the table last week to present our estimates or our requests for capital.
Understood, but
and
no,
by the way, I didn't find out about that until quite late. I did not receive that invitation directly.
So if your committee or subcommittee hadn't met in a month, you're clearly thinking that there's nothing of substance to meet on to discuss regarding potential exposure on CARES.
Not true. What I said
well, then why didn't you have a meeting then?
It was premature to sit down and try to put a tight estimate on exactly what we were going to need going into the second half. That was our intent for immediately following the Thanksgiving holiday.
Okay, thanks.
I'm not sure what you're getting at here, but if you had asked, we would have tried to put together the same guideposts that we ultimately presented to the Finance Committee last week. So there was, and it wouldn't have been any more precise, quite frankly, at the time.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to move on to Dan Alford. I believe you had your hand up, Dan. You have a question?
Well, I just want to sort of give you a little bit more sort of context as to what the Finance Committee was trying to do, working with with Ann Louise and the school committee. What we were really trying to accomplish was looking at this from a 50,000 foot perspective. How do we bulletproof the budget to allow us to operate and continue to operate the town under a whole host of different circumstances, of which, sure, you may be able to say, this is a potential outcome, but right now, but we don't really know what will end up happening and in what sort of set of circumstances it might happen. So, for instance, we're operating under the assumption right now, certainly I am, that there will be more federal aid of some sort, whether it's directly to the schools or if it's to the states and then trickles down to us some other way. We're operating under the fact that, the state will eventually figure out a way so that we stop paying fraudulent unemployment insurance claims, right? And we believe that there will be more money coming, but we wanted to also make sure that just in case we couldn't hold a town meeting in May, like we couldn't last year, if we had to postpone it and God forbid have to put it to the other end of the fiscal year, that we had as much operating flexibility as possible. We certainly weren't trying to pull this over on anything on anybody. I mean, I was, we didn't know what the number Ann Louise was going to come up with, or Ann Louise and Keith was going to come up with. And frankly, I'm glad to hear that it's smaller, but thinking about having 800,000 and this still being 600,000, I still don't think that we would have maybe put any less money or requested, suggested putting any less money into the reserve fund. But I think to say this is CARES money, this doesn't have much to do with CARES at all, because CARES will have been expired. So we're not talking about CARES spending. We're just talking about sort of ongoing keeping the schools open or ongoing keeping the town open type of money. So I really hope you can sort of separate that. And look, I understand that sort of the point is, in some ways is this foreseen, and I mean the only other alternative would be to then transfer 600,000, to a town meeting transfer $600,000 into the school's budget that they may or may not need, because that is sort of unforeseen. And by putting the unemployment insurance, taking 100,000 out of unemployment and moving it to reserves, I understand that that does sort of get freed up to eventually have a line item transfer, but that's not till May 1st. If we put it into reserves immediately, it's actually available to be transferred at any time. So what we're trying to do is, if you think about it.
That's a great point. I don't mean to stop your thought, but yeah. Keith, could you explain to us, if the worst case financial scenario developed, when in your financial calendar would that dollar amount develop? What's your run out date?
Saying like we run out of cash.
Yep, we're sitting on $579,000 is the worst case scenario. When does
technically that's less than our summer payroll for teachers, so it would be June 30th or June 29th or whatever that is. There's the last payroll, and Mary Bosquet would do she does the summer payroll and 4 payroll runs sometime.
So using the scenario that the finance committee kind of pulled together last week, Dan, and this is the point, think on this, the obligation for the transfer would be to clear up a deficiency that would occur somewhere towards the end of June.
Sure, but let me just counter with saying we don't know if we're going to hold a Maytown meeting this year. What if the vaccines fall apart and the virus is raging out of control and we can't hold a town meeting for some reason? We have to push it till July again. I'm just saying that's now over the end of the fiscal year. This is what we're trying to do here, is we're trying to plan to prevent the town from being in a situation where we are stuck and can't do something.
I heard that part of the argument in your meeting, and I'm curious to find out why that has anything to do with the reserve fund transfer, because the bylaws indicate you folks have the authority to make changes with or without a town meeting. Is that correct, Dan?
We have as far as the 100,000 out of unemployment insurance, that would be correct. As far as
no, I meant out of the reserve account proper, like what is now 600 or whatever.
We can move that money anytime at any time once it's requested, right? It's not something that we can do on our own. There would have to be a request from an executive authority to us for those purposes, and then we could do it at any time. Correct. But that's again why we want to bolster that account so that we can do it. Because, for instance, if the town needed 600,000 on June 25th and we only had 400,000 into the account because we hadn't put more into that account, we wouldn't be able to meet it with the reserve fund because we wouldn't have the money in the reserve fund, and you wouldn't be able to access a town meeting under this scenario to get access to the stabilization account.
Are there any other questions from folks on the Zoom call associated? Okay, somebody's waving their hand. Mary Greendale, go ahead. If you have a question, go ahead.
Hi there. I'm not concerned about the substance of this conversation. I followed it and I understand how you all got there. Once again, I'm back to process and just why this was done after I waited so long to do the TV show and talk about the warrant and hope that we'd get it all in there and so forth. And we did all of it and we got it all and we got it posted, and then boom, bang, something else, emerged. And I don't know, it bothered me a lot because I did look at the finance committee meeting. It bothered me a lot that I didn't hear the normal kind of, this conversation, the conversation that Keith has provided tonight, and the conversation that, maybe from the school committee or maybe Anne Louise representing what the school committee said, none of that happened. So to me, I found the process fraught with problems, aside from whatever issues that you all collectively want to resolve here. I don't understand how it even came about. I was watching and it was like a last minute thought on Ken Shada's part that, oh, well, I've got these two things. One's this and one's the COVID stuff. And then we were away and running and it was like, where did this come from? And I don't have anything of this, you know, in the
If I might, Mr. Chair,
table or otherwise.
if I might.
Yes, please, go ahead, Dan.
Mary, good, fair enough. You know, our point was we weren't looking to drill into all the details of what the school was going to need and need it exactly for. Frankly, it's 600,000, it's cash, right? I mean, there could be a whole host of different things and they probably don't know exactly what it was for. Again, we were more trying to bulletproof the budget so that we had the maximum amount of money that they might need. So it wasn't being spent at the time. We certainly weren't transferring it. Certainly before any transfer ever came, we would have asked for all the details and we would have, you know, dug into it. We really were just sort of trying to figure out what that dollar amount was so that again we could plan for it. As far as the process goes, you know, look, it's unfortunate in past years, the select board has presented the sort of the final draft warrant to us before they've sort of signed it, and then we voted on it on Tuesday night, and they have then sort of approved it in a subsequent meeting. Actually, in the past, and I'm not suggesting they need to do this, but in the past, prior select boards have actually scheduled a Wednesday meeting to sign the warrant after we sort of made, you know, the final decisions, because we let everybody know that Tuesday was our planned, you know, debate to sort of iron everything out. I think that was, you know, and somehow, you know, that things got a little bit mixed up there. I didn't realize that they were finalizing it on Monday. I certainly would have suggested holding off until Wednesday, but you know, that I'm not passing blame. I'm just saying that you know that got a little mixed up there. But again, as far as the process with the schools go, it was really more, and the reason why it sort of sounded like an afterthought, because I don't really think it was from Ken, was more like we weren't looking for the details. We just kind of wanted the number for now. So that
But what was the vote? What was the vote?
The vote was to move an additional 200,000 into the reserve fund so that we had money in case the unexpected happened and no additional funding came from the federal government or from the state.
Right. So you did take an action, but you took an action without the normal kind of process that you require. You make every board department come in with.
Because we weren't spending the money. We weren't transferring the money. Nothing. At the end of the year, had this money not been needed or used, it would have fallen to free cash and would have gone back and been freed up for other appropriations. So I will disagree with you saying that we broke our sort of normal process, because again, we were not voting to recommend that the town actually spend the money, simply put the money into an account where we may use it after going through that sort of process that we would have for any kind of reserve fund transfer. Again, look, this year is very difficult to do all of this, right? Because things are moving so quickly. I mean, I just want, you know, this is a crazy year with COVID and unknowns all over the place. And I'm sorry, Mr. Chair, for taking the time, but I just, you know, so many moving pieces makes it more difficult.
I'm sure we might have a follow-up for you. Ann Louise, you had your hand up. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I think Mary brings up a very fair point. I don't think the schools have ever shirked a responsibility or certainly the opportunity to present in detail. If anything, we're often criticized for going a little deep on detail. And we would like to have done that, Mary, and I think it would have been helpful for everyone. And frankly, if we had known that's what the conversation was going to be, I think we would have done it. Or if we could have talked at this meeting that apparently happened a few weeks ago, I would have been delighted to have come to the table with some more detail on precisely the numbers that we gave last week. Having said that, when I said to you that, you know, the budget subcommittee was sort of sitting on hold for a minute, we last met before the election and there was so much uncertainty. Maybe I'm naive. I think I had hoped we would know who the president was by this point and where we would all be standing on stimulus funding for the second half of the year. And even now, I'm optimistic that that will sort itself out. And that's why we had planned on convening at some point, early December, first week, to try to iron this out a little bit more with a little bit more precision on where we were going to stand in our exact expenses for the second half of the year. We did, for what it's worth, have an initial estimate of this that Dr. Kuska and Mr. Bidet provided to the budget subcommittee. Gosh, I want to say in a few different meetings, we reviewed it in September and October. I believe Ms. Hine, who is our liaison from the select board, was either at one of those, certainly was invited to them. So that information is publicly available because it's a subcommittee meeting. So we'll get that to you, but it wouldn't be as precise as what it is now, because literally what the spreadsheet said was, here's what we think we're spending right now. And then second half of the year was kind of like ditto until we were closer to the point in time where we could be sure exactly what the second half would call for. So there were some assumptions. The assumptions were, we're not going to be remote because it's more conservative, if you will, financially to assume we're going to be in school because it costs more to be in school. And there were a few other major assumptions, around current staffing, et cetera, et cetera. So I think we'd be delighted to give you more information on that moving forward. Certainly, make it as transparent as possible.
Well, to that point, may I ask the chairwoman, Stacy, if you have a second. As you hear this, forgive me, I don't know your schedule on when the school committees are posted between now and December 5th, if you can have a meeting. Is this a matter that you would seek to take up as on a vote to endorse or anything along that line?
Okay, so first of all, our regularly scheduled meeting was actually December 10th. So it was after town meeting. We did talk about having a meeting next Thursday, really sort of a special meeting, if you will, as we were awaiting some updated guidance from the MIAA for winter athletics. And that was really the gist of why we would meet next week. At this point, unless Mr. Boudet gave the recommendation that the schools needed to request additional funding, I don't see why we would vote on. I don't see what we'd be voting on.
That's exactly right. Yeah, that's exactly right, Stacy. There's nothing to vote per se. What all we're doing is looking at projections, if you will.
And I guess I just want to clarify for others that the CARES meetings the 2 meetings that we've had have really just been a very quick and very high level discussion about CARES funding. And I report to the school committee anytime I sign a warrant that has any funding, but in particular, I call out the CARES funding. So I just want to be clear about that if anyone has questions on what we've actually spent to date or whatnot.
But the topic of the annualized impact of the CARES money on the school's budget has been discussed at both of those meetings. And my question, because Ms. Hanstead, who was not in attendance at either meeting, is welcome to join them going forward, however, brought up the point that her subcommittee hasn't met in a month. And if indeed there were conversations afoot anywhere that the schools were looking at a potential liability of $682,000 in CARES Act, whether it emanated from the school committee chairwoman or the subcommittee chairwoman, none of that was mentioned to us leading up to today.
John, in fairness to the schools, I mean, we've always known that there's a big liability in the second half if no additional funding came through. We never knew what the sort of exact size it would be. We kind of had a ballpark, but there have been favorabilities and stuff at the school. I mean, so there's been a lot, and Ms. Hine has been at these meetings where this presentation and these
Dan, you're absolutely right, and I don't think tonight's the night to talk about it, but those conversations have always included the word favorability. Whether or not the schools needed the $682,000 that's currently planned and envisioned was always part of the conversation. It is not my job, it's your job and your committee's job to find out what kind of favorability the school committee has to absorb any such deficiency before they ever got to a reserve account.
Well, and that's what we were working towards. And I just don't think that I don't think that they were anticipating needing to know the answer quite as early as I think that we were sort of asking for it, just because I think, as Anne Louise said, they were planning on sort of digging deeper into that just post Thanksgiving to sort of, start planning, especially once we had a better idea of what the federal sort of government structure is going to be. I think we now know who the president's going to be, but we still don't know who's going to control the Senate. So there's still going to be a lot of uncertainty there. But anyway,
So as a
I'm
result of
cautious.
yeah, I got you. So as a result of looking at this evening, I guess the question is, so what's the big deal? The Finance Committee, presumably, unless they change their mind, will be offering a motion to amend Article 1 and Article 3 at town meeting. The motion, in my humble opinion, our board hasn't talked about this, is completely unnecessary. I think what we've achieved tonight is a savings of over $100,000 against the number that was floated last week as the worst case scenario.
Would respectfully disagree, but
I understand, Dan. Well, that's what they have town meeting for. You can.
No, but my point is that this only leaves 200,000 in the reserve fund if we had to transfer all the money into the school account, and that's if we took the unemployment insurance as well. So I think that we were planning with the number that the schools were giving to be still razor thin in the reserve fund, which was not something I was loving doing, but at the same time,
no, I guess what I'm saying, Dan, is I guess what I'm saying, if I could,
it's not a
Louise, if I could just state my premise, if the other issue, Dan, is you folks contrived of a $200,000 solution against a problem that may or may not ever occur. What we found out a week later is that half of that amount is already on the table. Mr. Bidet is reporting a savings of over $100,000 against that number. Yes, it is, Ann Louise. He said it's now 579 versus 682.
Wait, I want to clarify.
If I could, you can talk in a second, Ann Louise. I know you can. I know, and I'm sure you will. I'm just trying to figure out some math here. Dan said he respectfully disagrees because the other half of their equation was drawing $100,000 from the unemployment insurance line. And our point has been, and I listened to Mr. Ahern make this argument last week, was you don't need to touch it. It will revert as a line item transfer on May 1st. You don't need a town meeting. You can grab as much money from that as possible. It'll be more than enough to cover the remaining $100,000. And consequently, there's no need for this motion. And there's no need to add a debate around a solution that doesn't need to be had at a town meeting when we're trying to expedite our business. So that's the premise. And Louise, you were starting to say something when I was speaking. Go ahead if you have some comments to make.
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify. It's not a savings, John. We put forth a preliminary estimate last week. I asked Keith very specifically if, to err in covering everything until we can refine the number. So I wouldn't call it a savings because we haven't saved money doing anything. He was able to dig in, spend the better part of his weekend so he could be prepared tonight to give you the details that now are yielding. Some costs actually were higher, others were lower. And so there's been an adjustment in the number of $100,000.
Additionally, there's the other 100,000 that we were reducing the move into stabilization for. So even if you were to hold unemployment insurance stable, you would still have to have an amendment. I would also posit that we don't need to have a debate. If the select board doesn't want to have a debate, we could simply move the 100,000 from unemployment insurance and the stabilization and through an amendment and not have a debate and just have it go forward as well. So just because this is not how you prefer, it doesn't mean that there couldn't be a debate or wouldn't be a debate if you just also would sort of see, hey, this gives the town the most flexibility, the earliest and the quickest, and we're in a really unknown situation as far as budgets and costs. So maybe we want to ensure that we have as much flexibility as possible.
Any other comments we'll start with the board and then work our way down. Ben, any other comments at this point?
Yeah, I think this is I find this entire thing frustrating. We're in the middle of a pandemic. We're elected to make good decisions on behalf of the town, and we're all trying to do our level best to do so. And I think this whole thing is unnecessary. It's going to confuse town meeting, and I'm very frustrated with this whole situation. And I'd like, I got comments from July town meeting that we needed to do better, and I don't feel like this is doing better. So I'm just disappointed with the entire situation. I'm allowed to have my opinion, please.
No, I'm just saying this wasn't meant to be a fight.
I am frustrated with this situation. This is my opinion. This is just how I feel. That's all
I'm just saying it wasn't meant to be a fight, Ben. We weren't trying to start anything. We were just trying to make sure that we were as flexible as possible with the budget. And we weren't really, were not trying to usurp you guys. That was just not what was going on.
We got you. We got you. Tina, any comments before we make our way down to the other folks on the Zoom?
Yeah, I mean, real quick here. So Keith Boudet presented some updated information that, you know, he spent some time collecting. And I understand that if coulda, shoulda, woulda, it would have been there Tuesday night. It wasn't. If we go back in time to Monday of last week, we have a warrant that was prepared by our town administrator carefully, thoughtfully, and well. It was reviewed by the select board. It was presented time and again as votes were cast to the finance committee, all of this in public meeting. We've had the chair of both committees, select board and school committee, meeting with the business manager and the town administrator periodically over the past couple months. There were no red flags flown to indicate that this was an issue. We have the business manager tonight updating the numbers. If we go back in time to last Tuesday night with the information we have tonight, what justifies a decision to make the moves? And that's why I referenced the screen that you had up there before with that comparison chart. What now tonight would justify that vote? All I'm hearing is worst case scenarios. And all I'm hearing is that we want to bulletproof our reserves and we want to prepare for the unknown, that we can't have a Maytown meeting because the vaccines don't come through. I just don't see the decision-making that justifies the recommendation that's on the screen that we're left with today after Tuesday's Finance Committee vote. I'm looking for the details that fully justify undoing the work of our town administrator, undoing the work of the process of the past couple of weeks to prepare this warrant. For me, I don't see it. I share Ben's frustration. I accept that it was a well-intended decision that the Finance Committee made, but I think if you go back in time and put this information in there, you only have worst case scenarios that are hypothetical in the future to justify a decision that, again, undoes the work of our town administrator and the warrant we have prepared. Just a matter of 2 weeks, 2.5 weeks, if that, ahead of town meeting. Like Ben said, it doesn't feel right. It's frustrating. That's what I wanted to share.
Okay, thanks. Any other comments on the Zoom call? Mary, go ahead.
This will be quick. I'm sorry, but I must either be missing something just so global that I'm out of it. But how can the vote taken by the Finance Committee even be real if in fact there was no request by the school committee or the school department or the school committee to do it? And so I'm just concerned about, again, process. Not sure that, all right, anyway, that's it. I just don't see how it's even a valid vote, but okay, somebody can correct me. Anne Louise, I'm sorry.
That's great. You actually got it right. So
Anne Louise, hang on 1 second because Dan had his hand up first. Go ahead, Dan. Did you have a response?
I'll let Anne Louise, but it's a valid vote because we're moving money into the reserve fund. It's a totally different vehicle than anything else. And Tina, if I might, I mean, I would sort of counter to your point as being what's the harm in doing it the way we did? I mean, I look, Travis and Mr. Hearn, you know, the town administrator has done an incredible job putting together all the numbers that he did, but we're literally changing 2 numbers. It's not like, you know, we're trying to rearrange all the work that he did. We're just trying to move things around. And I would say that our job, certainly on the Finance Committee, is to try to bulletproof, is to try to plan for the sort of the unexpected, is to try to ensure that the town is ready for things that may not, you know, be very likely, but are bad scenarios which have really bad outcomes if they do end up coming to fruition. You know, this is, again, you know, there's no real downside to doing what we're proposing, but there is theoretical downside to not doing it that way. And again, we were not trying to take anything away from you guys and your authority or anything. It was just the way that the calendar lined up and where sort of the votes were taken. Again, John, I know we've had a lot of disagreements over the past couple of years. The furthest thing from my mind was that this was anything to do with any of that. This was simply just, we were just trying to do what we were trying to make the best sort of decisions to put the town in the best position possible so that we didn't, you know, run out of money when we needed it.
I hear you, Dan, and I'm not taking that away from this conversation. I echo Ben's comment. It's unnecessary.
It is frustrating. I get it's frustrating. I can hear you.
Well, no, it's unnecessary. The motion, you folks are also not putting $100,000 back in stabilization. There's been a lot of talk about what FY '22 would look like. Adding $100,000 into that account makes a lot of sense. There's no need to do this motion. It makes no change, no difference at all.
We're still doubling stabilization from what we took out of it. I mean, we're putting in more money in the, double the money we put in. We're putting double the money that we took out of it in. So we're still putting.
What we're saying is, without this motion, everything your committee tries to achieve is achievable without a town meeting. You'll have access to plenty of cash on May 1st for line item transfers, which we're telling you right now will greatly exceed the $100,000 that you guys want. We found $100,000 against the number that the school committee advanced last week. That's $200. That's the work you did. If your board determines on December 5th to withdraw its motion, people can get home earlier and they don't have to stand around talking about a motion. That's not necessary.
Wait, I'm sorry. Where's the second 100,000 coming from?
Excuse me. The 100,000. First of all, the total exposure by the schools was originally reported to you at 682. Mr. Boudet is updating that number tonight to 579. That's over $100,000 in savings.
Let me just, John, if it might, so let's just take your premise of the 100,000, we keep that in the unemployment insurance, but still use the 100 from stabilization. That brings us to $700,000. If the schools need the 600, just under $600,000 for it, that leaves us with about $100,000 in stabilization, of which we've already spent. We've already spent out of stabilization 40 or so just so far this year, leaving, that's still a pretty tight. I think the finance committee, certainly I was under the assumption that the final school request in the worst case scenario probably wouldn't be the almost 700,000. It would still be a little bit less because again, there would be some favorability and stuff, leaving us that cushion. So I would say that we don't want to leave only 100,000 of theoretical cushion in the reserve fund, regardless.
But that's what your plan was last week.
Well, yes, that was sort of the plan, but it was again under the sort of hope that any number would be less and that we could kind of just skate by, because again, we didn't want to put more into the reserve fund than we already were by taking down the stabilization. So again, we were planning on there being some additional favorability of the schools or not all the money needed everywhere. You know what I mean? Like that was tighter than I was really kind of comfortable with, but I also didn't want to take more and put it into the reserves.
Anne Louise, you had your hand up. You do have some more remarks to make.
Yes. So Mary's observation, well, how could the vote, how does the vote make sense when the schools didn't make a request? And I think that brings up a very relevant point, actually. So we didn't make a request, at least not as of last week per se. We were asked to estimate the potential exposure, which is something, again, we were going to do in early December when we had a little bit more visibility into what that exposure potentially could be, hoping we might know something about a stimulus package. Because with any stimulus funding, the exposure goes down significantly. But I think the most important part of this, there's a nuance. Our responsibility in the schools is to manage our budget, estimate our expenses, and draw out a picture for the town on that. But what we don't get involved with is the mechanism for funding that, if you will. And there's when you're in extraordinary times like this, there are different mechanisms you could potentially use. That is the purview of you and the finance committee, depending on whether it's CARES money or it's stabilization, reserve funds, et cetera. So, we didn't go to the finance committee, nor should we have, and said, hey, we'd like you to make this transfer of a certain amount. There was no request for that. I'll be really honest. I don't think we knew even last week that was going to be necessary. What we really needed to do was, frankly, have the benefit of a little bit of time to get through the next few weeks to figure out exactly where things were going to stand. And I will say this one last time, the number that you got tonight of 579 could change. In fairness to Mr. Boudet, as good as he is at his job, there's still a lot of things that are changing on us week by week. So some things could go up, some things could go down, and we may benefit from that. I hope that we would. Our total exposure, we're hoping, drops significantly closer to the $120,000 floor. So I'm not sure what request we would have made, if you will. All we can do is help the town understand the potential exposure that we might have faced. And when when you kind of get put up against the wall and you say, well, what's it going to be? We came up with a number last week that I think was reasonable. We've refined it. It may get refined again. So whatever the town chooses to do in terms of, reserve funding, et cetera, stabilization, super. But that doesn't come as a request, if you will, from the school committee.
Thank you, Anne Louise. Any other comments on the Zoom call this evening relative to this matter on the warrant? With respect to my colleagues, Ms. Hine, Ms. Sparrow, unless you have any objection, I would like to ask our town council to examine the matter involving the Finance Committee's recommendation to make sure it fits within our budget guidelines, our budget rules. I think Mr. Sparrow brought up an excellent point this evening about whether or not this foreseen potential problem would be a reserve fund action. Are we putting ourselves in a difficult position with our bonding agencies and auditors should that motion be adopted by town meeting? So if you don't have any objection to that, I'd like town council's review of that. Ms. Hine, any comments? Mrs. Sparrow? That's fine.
No comments from me.
Okay. At this point, if you could, Mr. Ahern, extend that question to Tallerman, I'd appreciate it, and report back to us. Mr. Bidet, thank you so much for coming in this evening. We appreciate it. We appreciate folks on the Zoom to joining us. We hope you have a great holiday as well. Good-spirited discussion. I suspect it will continue on December 5th. I'm hoping it doesn't, so that we can get in and get out as fast as we can, but town meeting will make that determination. We'll move on our agenda at this point for comments from the town administrator. Travis.
Okay, just two at the moment. Town hall had been, since I started, in the first floor is open by appointment only, bottom floor is open to the public, sort of balanced, and that served us well. We got through the last few months with that. We got through early voting and the use of town hall when it came to the presidential election, and now that we're through that, the decision was made to make town hall by appointment only for the full building. So that's been updated out there on the website. Again, all we're asking really is if it's a resident who, you cannot do your business remotely, which we've, greatly improved our ability to do a lot of business online. If you must come into town hall, we just ask you to coordinate with staff, give us a call, set up an appointment to come in. When you call one department, if you know you're going to want to see multiple, just make sure that we're having staff direct you to those other departments so that you can set up appointments and do all your business. And that's obviously for the public's best interest, but also our employees. The other announcement that I would make is it's relevant to town hall is that on this Wednesday we will be closed at noon for the Thanksgiving holiday. That is a standard practice of the town, and we'll be continuing that. And we wish everybody a happy Thanksgiving. That's all I have.
Will you be open on Friday?
We will not be open on Friday.
So closed on Friday, early release on Wednesday.
Yes.
All right. Any comments from the town? Any questions for the town administrator from the Zoom call? Hearing none, we will move on to the EDA status application. Travis.
Okay, so I had brought this to the board earlier, and one thing that I wanted to make sure was that the EDC, the Economic Development Committee, had time to weigh this and make a recommendation to you. They now have weighed it, they have taken a vote, and they've given you a recommendation. I did not take the time to really give you the full rundown on EDA status, the benefits to the town, so I'd like to take a moment to do that. But obviously, I've had this conversation as well with the EDC. They've given you a recommendation letter that they like this idea. Let me just start from the very high level on this, that EDA is a horrible name for what this is. It's called Economically Distressed Area. The communities that have achieved this status are the Newtons, the Marbleheads, some very wealthy communities in the Commonwealth that clearly would not fall under that title if it was, sort of at face value. A better way to look at EDA is actually ETA, which is Economic Target Area. It's for communities that have identified parts of their community that they like to target for economic development. And that's a better way to look at it. So I'm going to refer to it as ETA designation from now on, because that name is much more appropriate. Essentially, what I'm asking you to do, if you would approve, as the board, we would send a letter to the Economic Assistance Coordinating Council, the EACC, requesting that they review our EDA status and look at census tracts within town. And what I'm going to look at high level, though I can answer any questions you may have, is sort of the benefits to the town, public and private. So we were approached by one individual who's looking to put solar on a private parcel. EDA status and the census tract that parcel falls in would allow them to access brownfield tax credits. And so that is obviously a benefit to a private party. The other benefits to the town can be seen on two other properties. 9 Green Street is in a different census tract, and whether the town ends up owning that property or it flips back to the private sector in the long run, having that property within an EDA census tract would allow either the town or a private entity to access different sorts of economic development funding, such as mass development, which is a group that provides funding but requires that the project be within EDA status territory. And another lot that would be in a different census tract would be the Axton Cross property, which the town does not currently own, but has been in court for a while now. And so essentially what we'd be doing is I'd be putting together a letter to this group requesting that they look at us for EDA status. And then the benefits could be seen by public and private entities looking to develop some areas of town, specifically, as I mentioned, one property that's looking at solar, the 9 Green Street property that we're looking at for a variety of options, whether it be public or private, and then there's the Axton Cross property that could also benefit from this, as well as others. And so if there's any questions on the process, obviously it is a little, it's a little involved. I've provided you with some feedback from Tallerman's group on the process, and as well as a letter that I would be sending, and then the recommendation, obviously, from the Economic Development Committee here in Holliston.
Any questions on that, Ben?
I've asked this before, but just I'll ask it again. Is once you are assigned an ETA, EDA, whatever we want to call it, designation, that's in perpetuity. It's not something that's like, we have to re-up every 2 years or something like that?
There is not a re-upping. If we were to apply for this and they were to deny us because of any deficiencies in our application, we could continue to apply. But as far as I'm aware, the list that has grown in the Commonwealth, and there's very many communities of the 351 in the Commonwealth that have at least one census tract. My understanding is that you're on that list and then you're sort of in it. I mean, I think to remove yourself would be asking to remove yourself, not.
So like if there were changes to the census tract in particular because of the criteria that were necessary to be designated in the EDA, ETA space, would that be just re-examined at all, or is it just like those kinds of things wouldn't happen unless the town initiated that kind of conversation?
Yeah, this is a lot to do with the town initiating it. The list of towns that have applied for this status is actually difficult. Yeah, but it's also difficult to actually find because they don't update the list as much as you would expect. And again, I think I brought this up to the EDC, and I think I mentioned in my first go-around here. Somebody asked the question, because of the name, is there any drawback from an assessing standpoint, right? If I'm a home within this sort of census tract, is that detract from me? And we had our assessor called other communities that had this. And I think one of the assessors in another community said, was surprised to learn that their community had gone through this process, right? That's how little impact it has from that perspective.
Gotcha.
It is really gaining access to economic development grant opportunities that you don't have if you're not within this. The private impact, again, is access to the brownfield tax credit.
It's checking a box. It's not necessarily going to do a lot of other stuff. Okay.
Peter, any questions on the matter involving the EDA status application?
Not really a question, but I listened to the Economic Development Committee consider this request that Travis brought to them, and Matt Coletti, the vice chair, he brought up a really great question, and I just wanted to share what the answer was, because when you get into the details of this EDA or ETA, you probably find you have the same question, which is, the access to the brownfields tax credit is for the purpose of kind of inviting in businesses, corporations that can do the cleanup. And so this question was asked, are you inviting in specific types of businesses that might be interested? So perhaps you could extenuate that and say less desirable businesses. Like, who are you inviting in through this designation and then this ability to apply for brownfields tax credit? And the answer was pretty strongly any business. It doesn't put Holliston in a position where we're inviting a particular type of business. It really just opens up opportunities. So I wanted to kind of offer that reassurance. I found it reassuring to hear the gentleman who Travis had invited to the EDC meeting speak about that. Again, you're inviting any type of business to come in and consider applying for a brownfields tax credit and not a particular type of business. I don't know if I'm getting my point across, but I was left reassured that this would be a good move, especially when looking at something like 9 Green Street and keeping the door wide open for a variety of different types of business opportunities if that's what the town wanted to pursue. That's all.
So I see the letter has already gone out.
It has not gone out. I'm waiting for your approval.
Okay, but the EDC has taken a vote to recommend it.
To recommend to you.
Okay, so this evening is like a motion to enable you to submit the letter on behalf of Town of Holliston for EDA designation.
That's correct.
Okay. I will entertain a motion to enable the town administrator to send a letter requesting Holliston enter the EDA status application this time.
I'll make that motion.
Okay, would you rather second that because Ben did that?
Slight delay.
Is that a second?
That's a second, yeah.
All right, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye, that carries.
Aye. Or as they say in Canada, eh.
Eh,
Roll call aye, please.
Roll call, Tina Hine, aye.
Thank you.
Sense Farrell, aye.
John Cronin, aye. All right, we're going to move on to a portion of our agenda which the town of Holliston should be quite honored to hear about. Mr. Ahern, if you'd like to introduce the Police Life Saving Awards and Meritorious Service Awards that Chief Stone has advised us need to be bestowed upon certain officers in the town of Holliston.
Yes, you would like me to read it?
If you have the
Sure.
document, please.
So there is 1 Meritorious Service Award, and there are 3 life-saving awards that were given. The November 4th, 2020 Meritorious Service Award was given to Officer Scott Downey. And would you like me to read their sort of?
Oh, you know what? Do you want to read them? You're the clerk.
Sure.
The quick blurb.
I can read the first paragraph.
Yep, I think folks should be there.
All right. So the Meritorious Service Award for Officer Downey. This is from Chief Stone, Police Chief Stone. It is with great honor that I extend this department's appreciation and admiration and award you with our Meritorious Service Award for your actions on November 2nd, 2020. During the afternoon hours of Monday, November 2nd, 2020, your actions resulted in the life-saving efforts of a suicidal male party and should be deservingly recognized. At approximately 10:30 a.m. on that date, you arrived at a residence on Mechanic Street in Holliston and were faced with a very stressful situation of a 19-year-old male party who was armed with a knife and threatening to harm himself. Using your communications and de-escalation techniques, you engaged this individual in convincing conversation while keeping him calm and focused. Your compassionate approach led to a progressive discussion which eventually assisted this male party into making a life-saving decision and moved toward a safe ending for all. During the course of this incident, you treated the suicidal person with dignity and respect while having empathy for his current well-being. Without your calm approach, creative dialogue, and professional conduct during this stressful event, this man certainly would not be alive today. Our department recognizes and is very proud of your superior and professional actions during this incident. Through this event, you displayed your devotion to duty, your confidence in your abilities, and your courage to save another human being's life. This was truly an exemplary act while in a perilous and potentially dangerous situation.
Thank you very much. The next one is also a Meritorious Service Award for Officer Scott Downey. Do you have that one?
Yeah, just trying to make sure because I think they're in different order.
Yeah, sorry. So I think in the packet it's the life-saving and then Meritorious for Officer Scott Downey, and then the life-saving awards for John Scanlon and Ryan Parent should be right after that.
All right, so you want me to read the other one for Officer Downey?
Yes.
Okay. Again, these are from Chief Stone, Police Chief Stone. Officer Downey, I'm pleased to present you with our department's Life-Saving Award for your extraordinary efforts on a medical emergency call in the afternoon of October 21st, 2020. You and Officer John Scanlon were dispatched to the area of on Norfolk Street in Holliston for the report of a 64-year-old male party who was in need of assistance at the rear of his residence. Upon arriving, you observed the male party to go into cardiac arrest and begin to code. It was around this time that Officer Scanlon arrived on scene as well. You then checked the male for response and pulse. After finding neither, you and Officer Scanlon began two-person cardiopulmonary resuscitation. It was around this time that the Holliston Fire Department ambulance and the Medway Fire Department arrived on scene. At the time the male party was transported to the hospital, he had recovered both a pulse and blood pressure. Want to read that?
Yep, next one.
The next. This is a life-saving award for Officer Scanlon for looks like the same incident. I am pleased to present you with our department's Life-Saving Award for your extraordinary efforts on a medical emergency call in the afternoon of October 21st, 2020. You, along with Officer Scott Downey, were dispatched to an area on Norfolk Street in Holliston for the report of a 64-year-old male party who was in need of assistance at the rear of his residence. Upon arriving, Officer Downey observed the male party to go into cardiac arrest and begin to code. It was around this time that you arrived on scene as well. You then checked the male for a response and pulse. After finding neither, you and Officer Downey began two-person CPR. It was around this time that the Holliston Fire Department, ambulance, and the Medway Fire Department arrived on scene. At the time the male party was transported to the hospital, he had recovered both a pulse and blood pressure.
Good, and the last one.
Right, so there is a life-saving award for Officer Ryan Parent. I am pleased to present you with our department's Life-Saving Award for your extraordinary efforts on a medical emergency call on the evening of November 8th, 2020. At approximately 5:55 p.m., you responded to a medical emergency call for a male party who was unconscious and not breathing in a rear stairwell on Windsor Drive, Holliston. Upon arriving at the scene, you located an adult male who was completely unresponsive, producing agonal gasps of breath and a weak pulse, and whose skin was clammy to the touch. Based on your observations, you administered 1 4-milligram dose of naloxone to the male party. You then removed the male's T-shirt and began to prepare your oxygen and bag valve mask in preparation for rescue breathing. It was at this time that the male party began to gain consciousness. Shortly thereafter, Holliston EMS arrived on scene and began to prepare the male subject for transport to a local hospital for further treatment.
On behalf of the Select Board, I'd like to extend our heartfelt thanks to Officers Downey, Scanlon, and Parent for their outstanding service and commitment to our citizens. These examples that Mr. Starrell just read are quite stunning and show that our police department is always there for us when we need them. In fact, in these cases, in life-saving measures. Any further comments on that, Ms. Hine, Mr. Starrell?
I just would say thank you very much to the three of you for all the things that you do, and we really appreciate it as a community, and so keep up the good work.
Dana, any thoughts?
One more thing to be grateful for this week, that we have such excellence in our police department.
Very well. We'll move on to board business on our agenda. If Mr. Sparrow would like to read the donation from the Pryor family in memory of Jerry Chartrand for the Senior Center.
Sure. It's a good thing I have a lot of practice reading to my son, so. All right.
You got a great reading voice. Future in this.
I got a lot of practice. Although brown bear, what are you is a little different. All right. So this is a gift from the Pryor family to the Senior Center. It's in memory of Jerry Chartrand, and it is the gift is exclusively for charitable purposes, and it's to be given to the gift revolving fund in the amount of $100. So I make a motion to accept the gift from the Pryor family to the Senior Center in the amount of $100.
I have a motion and a second.
Yeah, I'll second that. Tina Hine.
Aye. John Cronin, aye.
Ben Sparrow, aye.
Okay, Ben, next one.
All right. So we have
one thing on this one.
Yes.
So this is back, we actually discussed the Senior Center grant for the Metro West Health Foundation last week.
Yes.
And me being new to town, did not realize that a grant is actually being signed for and acceptance by the Select Board.
Okay.
So we did hear from Linda Marshall last week on the purpose of it, and we can certainly hear that again. but this is back on here for you to vote to accept it, and then we'll have that signed.
Okay.
Okay, so we're just merely accepting the grant, in this case, of that amount
Formality.
for the 50 tablets and so forth.
All right.
You want to read that?
Sure, I'm gonna, this is a grant, for utilizing technology to engage seniors project. It's for the purpose of purchasing 50 tablets with covers, hiring a technology assistant for approximately 5 hours per week, and to pay for 10 months of internet service for up to 25 low-income seniors. The purpose of the grant is to decrease social isolation in seniors through technology. I'll make a motion to accept this grant, in the amount of $16,650 to the Senior Center, received from the Metro West Health Foundation for utilizing technology to engage seniors.
I have a motion. Do I have a second, Ms. Hine?
I'll second that with a comment, which is, again, congratulations to Linda. When I first joined the board, I was contacted by somebody from the Metro West Health group there to say Holliston can apply for these grants, and we encourage you to. So it's great to see that we were able to do that and we were awarded it. So again, Linda Marshall, thank you for the good work and congratulations. And I second the motion.
All right, all those in favor, aye. Ms.
Tina Hine,
Bell?
aye.
Ben Sparrow, aye.
John Cronin, aye. Okay, and on to the police gift from the Holliston Reporter.
All right, so this is a gift to the Holliston Police Department from the Holliston Reporter in the amount of $250. It is a police donation. So I'll make a motion to accept the gift to the police department from the Holliston Reporter in the amount of $250.
Second.
All those in favor say aye. Mr. Sparrow?
Ben Sparrow, aye.
Tina Hine, aye.
John Cronin, aye. That carries. Mr. Sparrow, would you like to make a motion to approve the Select Board meeting minutes from November 9th, 2020?
Certainly. I will make a motion to accept the Select Board meeting minutes from November 9th, 2020.
I'll second that.
All those in favor say aye. Mr. Sparrow?
Aye. Mr. Sparrow, aye.
Tina Hine, aye.
And John Cronin, aye. Finally, we have an appointment for the Youth and Family Services for Mr. Matt Pavinsky.
All right, so I will make a motion to appoint Matt Pavinsky to the Youth and Family Services. His term would expire in June of 2023.
Do we have a second?
I will second that, and I hope they understand they're getting a former humanitarian award winner in this recommendation.
I'm going to point that out, Anna Holliston Lyon.
Yeah.
So I have a motion and a second. All those in favor say aye. Mr. Sparrow?
Ben Sparrow, aye.
Tina Hine, aye.
And John Cronin, aye. Thank you, Matt, for serving. We appreciate that.
Thank you.
At this point, we'll move on in our agenda to other business. Mr. Sparrow, anything on your mind?
Just telling everybody happy Thanksgiving, be safe, and we'll see you next week.
All right, Ms. Hine.
Yeah, so if I could just take a quick minute, I want to introduce an idea that is out there in some towns surrounding us. So Natick, Milford, and Ashland have all taken steps to either reduce or eliminate the alcohol licenses that they are issuing for the upcoming calendar year. I can get into the specifics of what they've done. Framingham is in the process of considering it. I'm not sure if they've made a decision yet, but it's certainly something that is out there in other communities and as a way to help a particular type of business that has suffered greatly, that being really our restaurant business. Here in Holliston, we have a couple different types of licenses that a restaurant would apply for. And so the one I'm specifically talking about is a license to serve beverages, alcoholic beverages. The license fee, as I'm told from our town administrator office, is $2,500 for the calendar year. And so what I wanted to bring to the board tonight was a discussion for consideration of reducing or eliminating that fee, really for the sole purpose of helping these businesses that have suffered so greatly, and almost specifically these businesses that have suffered so greatly during the pandemic through reduced hours, through closures, and so on. It's something, again, other towns have looked to do. I feel like when you look at the list of these restaurants, you see businesses that are in some cases locally owned, employing local residents. and are a real critical piece to the fabric of our communities. So to lose one of these businesses would have a long-lasting and profound effect on our community. That's really why I bring this forward for consideration. We have helped people with our rent and mortgage relief, albeit a different program altogether. If we have an opportunity to help a business, I think it's something that we can explore. So I wanted to put this out there. I have some preliminary information that I could share. If the board is interested, I think we could pursue this further. So wanted to know what your thoughts were, Ben and John.
Okay. I think my question would be, how many of these licenses are currently out there? How many are we talking about?
So for, excuse me, bars and restaurants, we're looking at 4, total of $10,000 in revenue.
Okay.
When it comes to package stores, it ranges from $1,500, depending on what you're serving, to a full liquor license is $2,500. If you add those up, you're looking at $14,500. There's also one thing I think if you want to look holistically would be common, I can't say this word, common
Victular.
Vitulers. Yeah, very funny word. I've had problems with it my whole life. And there are some other smaller ones, and those are in the $50 range, 50 to like $150 range, depending on some of these other smaller ones that we do have, and I can bring all of that information to you. But when we're looking at a range, you're looking in the $25,000 range holistically for this portion. And one thing that there has been, as Ms. Hine mentioned, quite a few communities that have done this, either reducing it or removing it for the year. We just need to make sure that we feel confident that elsewhere within our local receipts, the way that we're setting our tax rate, we can make that up. And I did discuss that with the town accountant today. If the idea came up, if we think we would be able to cover that within the umbrella of local receipts. And all of that, again, I can bring back to you at a future meeting.
Yeah,
If
my
I may-
take is that, one second, if I could, I'm very interested in that information, and I will tell you, Tina, my take is I'm curious to see what the data says, but I am not individually looking to support forgiveness of the license fee for package stores.
Mm-hmm.
That's just my opinion. I'm curious on the restaurant side. I think that's something we should explore, as long as it doesn't tilt our local receipts in a meaningful way for FY21.
I don't disagree with you at all, John, on the package stores. And I say that because, in terms of the impact of certain executive orders and advisories and so on, I think they're only under one now, which is to say that they need to close their doors by 10 p.m., I think. And that's just of the past couple weeks. Not to say that it's nothing, but that's really been their impact, whereas restaurants have been impacted much more significantly. So I don't disagree at all with you. I wanted to throw out one other variation for any kind of relief we might be able to offer. And this is from the town of Natick, where they are staggering the payments. So instead of having the payment due all at once, as I think is the habit here in Holliston, you could stagger it so that the payment, if there was no decision to reduce or eliminate, or even if there were, you're staggering the payment through until the end of the fiscal year. So they have until June 30th to make that payment. That may offer a business more time to collect the money. So that's something else that is one variation of how this program's been set up.
Just one piece of follow-up. I'd also be curious to see if we're talking about, in this case, just liquor licenses, what are we forgetting? There are a lot of businesses in Holliston. Not all of them are thriving. We're trying to get people to shop locally. We had the Holliston Together group in a couple of weeks ago. I think it's meaningful that we take a step in the direction of trying to give relief where we can, but I also don't want to be myopic. I'd like to examine any other opportunities that are similar to this that we could reasonably look at and help out if we can. So I want to thank you, Tina, for bringing this forward. I think it's creative. It's to some extent walking the walk here. Here we are telling people to shop locally, and in this way, if we can provide relief, we can. One other point I just want to bring up, Tina, we've confirmed today that we cannot use the CARES Act in any way to recoup any forgiveness of such fees that we would engage in. So this would be straight off the bottom line for FY21. But let's see what those numbers look like if we could next week.
Would it be helpful for I'm sorry, last thing, would it be helpful for you guys if we got some support from Holliston together. So obviously we know who the contacts are there, could reach out for a letter of support or an expression of the need for this. So we can pull that trigger. Too premature?
I think if you're gonna go there, Tina, I'd ask for, like, what's the breadth of this?
Yeah.
Where does the creativity take us? Are there other areas we might want to think about, again, that does not negatively impact our FY '21 balance sheet? But, I don't need a letter of support. I think there's general support for it.
Right.
I think it's a question of, number one, can we afford it? Number two, what are we not thinking of?
Okay.
Right. Where else might it go? All right. Very, very cool. We good?
No, that's good.
Anything else, Tina, on your other business?
Nope.
Will we see you in the United States next week, or are you still going to be up there?
If they let me cross the, if they let me cross the border, I'm coming home with some college students who will have, well, you know what? Actually, John, you raise a good point. I have to be tested. And so depending on how that lines up, I may be virtual again, but I'll be, just around the corner from you. So if I can line up a test and get the results back, I'll be present. But I believe that's the Massachusetts order is I have to have a negative test or quarantine for 14 days.
Chief Cassidy's nodding yes. The table does feel bigger tonight, so I will say that. But we miss you. So with that, I will now entertain a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
I'll second.
All those in favor say aye. Mr. Sparrow?
Ben Sparrow, aye.
Tina Hine, aye.
And John Cronin, aye. Folks in Holliston, we sincerely hope you enjoy your Thanksgiving holiday. Thanks for joining us this evening, and we'll catch you next week. Good night.
Night, everyone. Hey, happy Thanksgiving.